Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GammaRay Report. My name is Rose GammaRay. I'm an aerospace engineering professional, lifelong science enthusiast, and complete space nerd. And my goal on this channel is simple, and it's to take fascinating science, explain it in a way that's accessible, engaging, and hopefully makes you look at the world and the universe a little bit differently. And tonight we're going to get into something that's a little bit different from our usual topics. We're actually talking about forensic science. And I want to start with a question. And that question is, does the perfect crime actually exist? Could somebody commit a crime and leave absolutely no evidence behind? We're talking no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, no security footage, no fibers, no hair, no digital trail, nothing that could ever connect them to what happened and what they did. Because if you watch enough true crime shows or, podcasts, you would probably think that the answer is no. Somebody always leaves, something, whether it's a fingerprint on a glass or maybe a single hair on a carpet. And then somebody takes that evidence, puts it in a lab and, puts it in a computer. And 5 seconds later, the computer starts beeping and they find some sort of match. I do have to say that real forensic science does not actually work like that. And tonight we're going to look at just how much information you might unknowingly leave behind simply by just existing and interacting with the world around you. We're going to talk about fingerprints and DNA, look at some different microscopic evidence like hairs and fibers. We're going to see how bloodstains and blood spatters can potentially help reconstruct entire crime scenes and what might have happened during a crime scene, and how toxicologists can also find different substances inside the human body and how the body itself can also be used as a form of evidence. So we're going to talk about a lot of different cool things. And then, there's an entire category of evidence that investigators more than 100 years ago didn't have access to at all, digital evidence and all of those things, and digital breadcrumbs that we also are always leaving behind basically everywhere that we go. So tonight we're going to be looking at what all of the science actually tells us. And by the end of tonight, hopefully we're going to be able to answer our question, does the perfect crime exist? But I'm not investigating crime all by myself tonight. I am once again joined by my amazing co-host, Goldie Gamari. And Goldie is actually perfect for tonight's topic because after years of being my sister, she has extensive experience investigating suspicious behavior and building cases against me using some questionable evidence. So welcome back, Detective.
Wow, you just called me out. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, Rose, for having me on. Always great to be here. Hello, everyone who's tuning in, especially guys. If you're watching this live stream on my channel, just a quick housekeeping note. The live stream chat is shut down. So if you want to participate in the live stream and if you want to ask my amazing and intelligent and very, very smart sister any questions about the topic, feel free to come over to her channel, the GammaRay Report. The link is in the video description. It's also pinned in the live stream chat. So hello, and great to be here, Rose.
Thanks so much, Goldie. And yes, welcome back to the channel. I made a brand new emoji for you. Did you see it? It's the hand raising emoji.
I did. I love it. It's like raising
my hand. Yeah. Oh, so this will go perfectly with your questions. You do have, a plethora of questions, which I love. And so, now we have an emoji to go along with all of your inquisitions and inquiries. So that'll be great.
Wow.
I
love it. I noticed, Rose, you also updated the Gamma Ranger emoji.
Yes. Yeah. So I updated the Rangers emoji. So that was a Rangers tab. It used to be horizontal, but it was a little bit illegible and hard to read just because of the dimension. So I kind of played around with it a little bit. Hopefully it gives the same idea and people kind of understand what I was going along with. It's basically the Rangers tab, but it's there's a Y, but it's the gamma emoji or symbol. And it's basically for all of our channel members. So all of our channel members are Gamma Rangers. So it's basically assigned to commemorate our channel members. So yeah.
I love that. I love that. And guys, just a quick note, if anyone wants to follow along, whether you're watching the live or if you're watching the replay, the companion pack is available. And as we all know, Rose makes the most amazing graphics and companion packs. And companion packs are, what is it? Is it 60% off for your YouTube channel members?
Yep. So it's 60% off for channel members. There's a discount code that channel members can find under my community posts. You can find the code there and then just pop it in. And if you wanted to follow along and do some, reading ahead and get some sneak peeks about some of the things we'll be talking about tonight, you can grab the companion pack. So yeah, it's a fun little guide that people can use if they want to get access to the different graphics and visuals that we'll be using tonight. So you'll be...
And, I just gifted 10 lucky subscribers.
Oh, wow.
Membership. So if you've just been gifted a channel membership to Rose's channel, then this is your opportunity to go and check out the companion pack and get it for a discount. So there you go. Some of the benefits of being a member.
That's awesome.
Yeah, guys, I'm so sorry if you didn't get one. It's totally random. YouTube does the randomizing gifting of channel memberships. So there you go. Visitor clock says test. Sorry, the test failed. Try again. Try again. This time you need what's the thing called? When you're doing a science experiment, but then you need the one which is like the standard, like the base.
Oh, like the baseline.
The control or something.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
The control variable.
Yeah, the control variable.
Yeah.
Visitor clocking. Try the test again, but make sure you have a control variable in your test this time.
That's funny. Well, thank you, Goldie, for the memberships. I also see Aggie also just gifted another 5 memberships. So thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate that. Welcome to all of the new Gamma Rangers. Make the most of your, channel membership. And
did you play the Gamma Rangers theme song now? Go, go, Gamma Rangers.
You know what? I should find that and play that, at some point.
You know what? You should make that the outro to your live stream.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Maybe we'll do that. Perfect. Okay, so as always, guys, this is a live stream, so hang out with us for the next couple of hours. Ask questions as we go. Participate in the live chat. And if you've watched CSI or any sort of true crime documentaries, and have always wondered, is this particular thing that you've seen on TV, is this actually possible? Ask away and we'll, check out those questions together. And I definitely want to know from all of you guys before we get started, do you think the perfect crime exists? So I have a quick poll that I will run right now. And so guys, pop in the chat. Does the perfect crime exist? 1 for yes and 2 for no. And while people are answering this question, we are actually going to need to get to our crime scene. So guys, get out your permission slips, put on your seatbelts, and let's hop on to our magic school plane. Except tonight, we're not going to outer space. We are, going somewhere much closer to home. We're actually going to a crime scene. And when we get there, guys, please don't touch anything. It's very important to not touch anything. Keep your hands to yourself. And guys, this is my Q400 Magic School plane. This is the plane I used to work on when I was in aerospace engineering. It's a great little plane, and it's our Magic School plane here. Okay, so guys, we have landed on our crime scene.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
Sorry, before we start. So I just want to say, I actually, for the last few months, I have literally been addicted to all these true crime channels on YouTube. And like when I'm not working, I literally put on like true crime in the background, or sometimes when I'm working and I just want something playing in the background on the TV, I'll put on like police interrogations. And then
Ooh.
and then I also notice, like, the police, they'll take like swabs and stuff of like faces and fingerprints and stuff. So
Yes.
like this topic tonight, right up my alley, because I'm like addicted to true crime documentaries.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love true crime too. I love true crime documentaries. There's this one specific channel that does police interrogation, that goes over like police interrogations. I love it so much, but he doesn't post very often. It's called JCS, or Jim Can't Swim. He's absolutely phenomenal. It's not one person, it's actually a team of people. Guys, definitely check him out. He's got like millions and millions of subscribers and views.
What's his name?
It's called JCS, which stands for Jim Can't Swim. But
Okay.
his only problem is that he only posts like once a year. So he doesn't have very many videos, but he's very popular, and he's just got, I don't know, I really like their analysis on different police interrogations, and they have some really cool cases that they've covered. And there's a lot of imitation channels just because that channel is so successful. Like people trying to copy JCS. But anyways, I'm definitely super into true crime as well. And yeah, guys, this is our crime scene. So
sorry, just couple of things before we get started. I'm so sorry, Rose. Just a couple of housekeeping. So I want to get to two super chats. So guys, the super chat Q&A, that'll be at the end of the live stream. So, make sure to ask all your questions. Rose will answer them. But Rose, there's two things that I think are pertinent that I just want to share with you before you get started. So the first one is from Jeff Ashley, who says, so if I pay attention, I can delete certain types of people and get away with it. I had to be vague because my last super chat would not go through. How do you respond to that?
Delete people. That is such an interesting way of putting it. Guys, I do have to give a disclaimer. This live stream is not a tutorial. So take that as you will. I don't condone deletion. So yeah, thank you for the question. But
I love how, as you said, you don't condone deletion.
Yeah, you deleted yourself.
That was me. That was totally my fault. So you don't condone deletion. Of course, obviously, like, this is not a tutorial. This is just
information, scientific. Yeah. Yes. Scientific information of what investigators typically look for, and what is typically left behind at a crime scene.
And then just another quick super chat really quickly. Donuts for the mods. So thank you, guys. There you go. So everyone enjoy your virtual donuts. I just wanted to share those two super chats. But guys, the rest will be at the end. And as always, if you are a channel member on Rose's channel, I am monitoring the live stream chat. And channel members, once in a while, I will also star your comments as well, as one of the perks of being a member of Rose's YouTube channel. So channel members, your questions may or may not be live starred and may or may not be answered at the end. So just a benefit of being a member of Rose's channel. And of course, thank you all for supporting her.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much, Goldie. And thank you all for being here. Okay. So guys, this is our crime scene. And I see most people, based on the poll, think that, yes, the perfect crime does exist, which I think is very, very interesting. Goldie, what do you think? Do you think the perfect crime exists?
I put yes, because there are unsolved crimes, right? Like, I remember there was like this one TV show that I would watch with, our mom and dad. And I think you were pretty young as well, but it was like, it came on, I think it was like every Saturday or every Sunday. It was like Unsolved Crimes or something. It was like an FBI show or something. And it was basically it was an hour-long sort of true crime documentary about unsolved criminal cases. So yeah, I do believe that the perfect crime exists because there are a lot of unsolved crimes out there, unfortunately, and a lot of cases have gone cold.
Okay, that's very interesting, Goldie, and we will come back to this at the end just to I want to let people know what I think on this question, but it seems like most people right now, including you, Goldie, think that yes, the perfect crime does exist. Okay, so guys, this is our crime scene. I want to know from the chat, what are the things that you guys notice? What are some, potential clues or pieces of evidence that someone investigating this crime scene might want to pay attention to, or, consider as something that they want to maybe double click on or get more information about? What do you guys see in this imaginary crime scene? To a forensic investigator, this room is basically like a giant collection of information. So Atgi says broken pot. That's interesting. Okay, great one. Dog 85 says footprints maybe to the right of the carpet. That's a good one. Jeff Ashley says looks like a blood or a shoe mark. Omid says blood on the floor. Julia says carpet. Jeff says more blood. Tony says footprints. Soapbox says broken potted plants. Okay, what else, guys?
I mean, I kind of feel like everything here could be part of the investigation, right? I mean, even when you look at, let's say, the makeup brushes, depending on what the crime is, right? You could get fingerprints from that, or, even the camera, or, I mean, I don't know, right? Like, I'm just thinking this is probably a trick question because everything is probably like relevant.
Okay, you're not completely wrong. I will say that like the brushes and the camera, those are like supposed to be part of the investigator tools.
Oh,
so like, it's the camera and like
I thought it was like a Sephora makeup brush.
No, but I like that interpretation. But yeah, some really great answers here at Geese as the remote. So let's go through this crime scene together, guys. So okay, so this is our secured crime scene. Number one, we see the drinking glass. So there's potential latent fingerprints or different touch DNA that could be over here. And then you have, so this one was harder to spot in the previous picture, but there's like either a strand of hair or some sort of fiber that's on the carpet here, which could potentially be, examined microscopically to see what that was.
I see that. It's like a little circle thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Over here. Over here. And then you have number 3 here, which is, a red splain or splatter. You don't really know what it is. It's some sort of unknown substance. It could be paint. It could be food. It could be, another household substance, or it could potentially be biological material. We would need to test it out to see what that is. And then number 4 here, you have more not blood splatter, more red splatter, and then some potential footprint markings here or footwear impressions. And then you have number 5 over here, which is the spilled soil debris. So that could potentially be a useful trace of evidence. Soil composition can sometimes be compared with soil from shoes or clothing or vehicles. And then you have the actual tipped over pot, which, could potentially contain fingerprints or different touch DNA, and can help with something like scene reconstruction when investigators are trying to figure out what actually happened. 7 over here, you have a smartphone. So, that could potentially include some digital evidence, whether it's phone calls or messages or, information leading to activity prior to the crime that happened. Number 8, you have a dish here or some sort of bowl, which can potentially include fingerprints or food residue. And then you have the coffee mug also, which is another potential source of fingerprints or DNA. Same thing with the TV remote. So that could also contain more fingerprints and DNA. And then you have the discarded blanket on the ground, which could contain hairs or fibers or more of the soil or different trace materials. The position of this sweater or whatever this item of clothing is could also help reconstruct the events that might have led to it being there. And then you have the actual sofa and cushion area, which could be a potential location for hair fibers and skin cells or other trace evidence. And then you have the carpet itself, which could also be more evidence for trace material like fibers and other small things that you might find in a carpet. So all of this is very useful for introducing valuable forensic evidence. And a lot of this stuff could be invisible to a naked eye. So you would actually need a lot of special equipment, which we'll get into, to figure out whether these are useful pieces of evidence and are actually related to the crime that happened, or whether, you know, they were just there from before. There's also a piece of evidence here which doesn't have a marker in this picture, but Goldie, it's very similar to what you said, but it's the general disturbance of the room, which may actually be evidence in a broader sense, because the room does look a little bit messy. You know, maybe it could just have been a messy person, but the whole room as a whole could also be considered as a piece of evidence to understand, you know, what might have led to the room looking like this. So there are so many pieces of potential evidence here that can point to what happened, which is why anytime investigators enter a crime scene, everything has to be secured and documented before any sort of evidence is disturbed, because it's so easy to contaminate a crime scene. And it's so easy for us to add our own fingerprints, our own hair fibers and shoe prints to that scene. So when investigators arrive at the scene, one of the first things they do is that they photograph everything, they record where objects are located, and they may even take measurements and create sketches of everything. And only then, once they do that, can the evidence be systematically identified and then collected and packaged and sent over for analysis. Because once you move something from a crime scene, you can't perfectly recreate the original scene that you found it in. And so if this glass was, you know, sitting here, for example, when investigators arrived, and then someone moved it to another spot, then we've lost essential information about how the scene was actually found. So it's very important to leave everything just as it is, which is why, you know, I was very cautious about not touching anything when we got to our crime scene. And all of this brings us to probably the most important scientific idea underlying tonight's live stream, which is a principle that we're actually going to come back to a few times. And it's called the Locard exchange principle. So this idea comes from a man named Edward Locard. He was a French scientist, and he was one of the pioneers of modern forensic science. And the basic idea of this principle is that whenever any two things come into contact, material can potentially be transferred between them. So, for example, imagine somebody walks through a muddy field and then comes into your room. They will most likely bring in soil from that field into their room on their shoes, but they could also take material from the room away with them. So let's say they sit on a couch, the fibers from their clothing could transfer onto the couch, and then the fibers from the couch could also transfer onto their clothing. Or for example, let's say they pet a dog. They could leave material on the dog and then walk away covered in dog hair. Maybe they break a window, for instance. You know, there will be tiny fragments of glass that could end up embedded in their clothing or their shoes. So this exchange can certainly happen in both directions. It can be from the person to the environment, and it could also be from the environment to the person. And forensic investigators are often trying to find those connections. So could this piece of fiber connect a person to this particular couch, for instance? Or could this, you know, piece of soil connect someone to this location that they might have been walking in? And so, you know, could biological material be connecting to people? And Locard came up with
I got my forensic gloves so I don't ruin your crime scene.
Oh yeah, so you don't contaminate. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Where did you just come up? Okay, Goldie, this is kind of scary. Where did you just come up with like plastic gloves?
These are my cleaning gloves. I use these when I'm cleaning so my hands don't get
Cleaning gloves?
dry. So yeah, I have a whole box of cleaning gloves.
Ew.
No, I'm being serious. Oh my gosh. Okay, now I have to go show you my cleaning gloves. Oh my gosh.
I'm just teasing. No. I'm just teasing you, Goldie. You know, we're not here thinking that you're out there deleting people, deleting, you know, Durkas. I didn't say that. Okay, so Edward Locard came up with this exchange principle in the early 1900s, before there was any sort of modern DNA profiling and before we had any sort of analytical instruments that we have today. And I'll show.
See, I have my cleaning gloves here.
Oh, I love that.
There you go. So
cleaning gloves, guys.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
But I just want to share quickly the story of Locard and, you know, what he was investigating at the time, which came up with this principle that we're using today. He was actually investigating the murder of a woman named Mary Littell and her boyfriend Emile Gourbin, or Goulbin, if I guess it's French. He was suspected, but he had an alibi where he was telling people that he was playing cards with friends at the time of Marie's murder. But then Locard was examining material from underneath Gourbin's fingernails, and then some of that material that was found under his fingernails were particles of pink cosmetic powder, which was the same kind of cosmetic powder that Marie was using as part of her makeup. And so essentially he was identified to be her killer. So the crime scene essentially is a kind of silent witness, where, you know, it can certainly give most evidence that you need to identify the perpetrator of a crime, you know, if enough evidence is left behind. But the catch about evidence is that finding it isn't enough on its own. You also have to protect the evidence that you find. You need to know exactly where it is, where it was found, who collected it, how it was collected, how the evidence was packaged, who transported it to the lab, who opened it at the laboratory, where it was stored. So all of this is very, very essential information and has to be protected and documented. And that's where something called the chain of custody comes in. And this is basically the way forensic investigators protect the evidence. So there needs to be a documented record showing how that evidence was moved from the crime scene through collection to then storage and then potentially into a courtroom if it makes its way there. Because if we're not able to establish who handled the evidence, or, you know, what might have happened from the time it was identified to the actual courtroom, there could be some, you know, legal implications there, and it could become problematic evidence and potentially not admissible in court. So all of the protection of the evidence is just as important as finding it, because a lot of cases could potentially be botched if the evidence is not protected in an appropriate manner. So, you know, before we've even analyzed.
Sorry, I just want to say it's really interesting that you're talking about all this because, you know, I obviously went to law school and I took criminal law. Ooh. But I also took the law of evidence, and I took the law of evidence with the top Canadian legal expert on the law of evidence. His name is David Pachaco, and Pachaco is a legend, and he's now actually a judge. So everyone in my law school at Ottawa University, like Pachaco's law, like class about the law of evidence was like the hardest thing, right? So if you were smart, you got like an A-, and, you know, for some weird reason, I got an A-. So like I was super blessed, right, that I got an A- in his class. But also I was the last class that he ever taught, because the next year he was promoted, and then he became a judge. So he went from being a
Wow.
lawyer to a judge. Yeah. So I literally took his last course on the law of evidence. And so it's really interesting, because all these things that you're speaking about, and most importantly, sort of the continuity of the evidence, and making sure that the evidence is not tampered with, that's really, really important. Not just from like a forensics perspective, but from a legal perspective, because one of the things that, let's say, defense lawyers do, criminal defense lawyers do, is they will always like question the sequence of events. How was the evidence taken? Who was there? What methods did they use, et cetera, et cetera. And if there's even like the hint of, maybe like some tampering, or if there's even a hint of inappropriate handling of the evidence, that could throw the case off, even if, let's say, everyone knows the person is guilty. So it's just very interesting that you're talking about this stuff, because I've kind of looked at this from the legal side of things. But now it's really interesting to look at it from the science side of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that context. And I love that you've learned a little bit, formally about the evidence process and the legalities behind that, because that just provides additional context as well about some of these things, which is super cool. So yeah, that's a very fun tidbit, Goldie. I think I remember when you were doing that course in law school, and you were sharing like so much fun information about like some of the criminal law cases that you were going through. But yeah, that's super interesting. That's probably where your love of true crime started, honestly.
Probably, but I mean, there's also a reason that I didn't become a criminal defense lawyer, because I was like, there's no way that. And listen, no judgment. I mean, criminal defense lawyers play a really important role in democracy, because it's all about innocent until proven guilty. But I have a lot of respect for criminal defense lawyers, because I literally could never. I could never. Right. So, but it is a very important part of democracy, and it's not just the legal aspect; it's the science aspect of it. So, this is really interesting for me, and I'm sure many other people who have maybe some knowledge or experience or understanding of sort of the legal side of things.
Absolutely. So, okay, now that we know, the journey of evidence and how to protect it, let's actually start to look at the different kinds of evidence that investigators consider when they are at a crime scene. And if you guys remember from our crime scene snapshot, the number one is the glass. So let's take a look at, what we might be finding on the glass. And I feel like there's probably a big likelihood that, someone might have left behind some sort of fingerprint on that glass. So let's take a look at what that might look like on a glass. So fingerprints as a whole are actually pretty amazing, because all of the little ridges at the ends of your fingerprints, they're called friction ridges. And you have them on your fingers, obviously, your palms, your toes. Goldie, I don't know if you can see yours with your gloves on. You have them on the soles of your feet. And if you look really closely at your fingertips right now, you'll see that those ridges actually form these complicated patterns. These are mine for context, guys.
Wait, Rose. Honestly, we can't see. Let me just make this big one moment.
Wait, I wasn't actually trying to show my finger. It was more of like a joke.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you guys want to see what my fingerprints look like, okay, hold on. These are my fingerprints, guys. I don't know how good this camera is. Wow, it looks really wrinkly from up close. I need to moisturize, but
now you know why I wear cleaning gloves. This is literally why I wear cleaning gloves. So that my hands don't go dry and cakey when I'm cleaning.
Yeah, but okay. So if you look closely at your fingerprints, you'll see, one of these combinations. So traditionally, fingerprint patterns are grouped into these three broad families. You have loops, you have whorls, and you have arches. loops typically curve around and kind of exit towards the same side. All like this example here is just kind of going to this one side here. Most people have this, this print, this style, this pattern on most of their fingerprints. And then you have whorls, which form more of a circle or like spiral pattern. This one is a little less common, but still like 30 to 35% of people have that. And then you have arches, which rise across the finger, kind of like a little bit of a hill. And apparently less people have this kind of style. But I actually, my index finger on one of my hands has the arch style.
I was actually going to ask you about that. Is this like a genetic thing? Because, okay, so I'm looking at my fingers, Rose, and most of my fingers are the loop.
Okay. Yeah.
Except for not my index finger. It's my like the I don't know, the fourth finger on my right hand, like this one here.
Okay. The ring
this
finger?
One, the ring finger. It's a whorl.
Okay. I don't think I have any whorls. Most of mine are loops, and then I have one arch finger.
Wow. So all of my fingers are loops except for one, which is a whorl.
Interesting.
So, like, I've never actually looked at my fingerprints before because I've never had reason to. But I'm looking at this, and so the ring finger on my right hand is a whorl. Like, it's like a perfect circle. But then everything else is the loop.
Yeah, I guess as Francis is saying, we're loopy. Most people are loopy. But yeah, so just a cool little fact about what fingerprints actually look like. But forensic examiners aren't just looking at whether you have like a loop or a whorl. They're more specifically looking at the actual individual ridge details within your fingerprint. So this is just like more information that could be found within a fingerprint. So one of your ridges might suddenly end, another one might kind of split in two, and that's called bifurcation, for instance. There can be different dots, there could be different enclosures and other different tiny features in the ridge structure of fingerprints. All of these different features, you can kind of sum it up to be called minutiae. And so all of these different details are what examiners are looking at. And it's the arrangement of all of this ridge detail that makes fingerprints so useful for identification. And the reason that we have fingerprints at all in the first place is because like these ridges help our skin interact with different kinds of surfaces, and they're associated with touch and grip. But the patterns themselves actually begin to form before we're born. And, as friction ridges are developing on a human body during the fetal growth stage, genetics, as you mentioned, Goldie, genetics influence the overall process, but the finer details of what these ridges look like are also shaped by different developmental conditions inside of the womb, which is why identical twins do not have the same fingerprints, because of the influence that happens as the fetus is growing within the womb, and maybe the different kinds of nutrients or environmental factors that might be happening to the different fetuses inside the womb. It helps develop what these ridges actually look like. So even though identical twins have the same DNA, they don't precisely experience the same identical microscopic developmental conditions while they're growing as fetuses. And so their friction ridges are different from one another, which is why they might have different fingerprints. And so once those ridge patterns are established, they typically persist throughout your whole entire life. Although obviously things like scars or injuries or different kinds of skin conditions can sometimes alter the appearance of your fingerprints. But that's why fingerprints as a whole can be incredibly useful. But You know, if you think about a crime scene, someone might not always leave behind a beautiful fingerprint like the ones that we see in these pictures. Most fingerprints left at crime scene are latent fingerprints, which essentially means they're basically invisible or difficult to see. And within a latent fingerprint, you're still leaving behind these tiny amounts of material from your skin, including sweat and other residues like your skin oils and things like that. And so that's when investigators have to actually develop a print. And this is where forensic chemistry comes into play and gets pretty cool. So I'm going to play just a quick little video clip of...
Oh, is it the clip of the Men in Black where when Will Smith is becoming a Men in Black, he puts his fingers on that thingy so that it gets rid of his fingertips, his fingerprints, so that he can't, be connected to any crime scenes? Is that what you're going to play?
That was the second option, but it didn't make the cut.
Okay.
So, maybe for the next stream. But no, so this is just a quick video of a lovely lady, crime scene investigator named Rebecca, who is demonstrating the technique of how to develop a latent fingerprint. So let's take a look at this and see how it goes.
For today's activity, I'm going to teach you how to lift a fingerprint off of the surface. There's 3 types of fingerprints: latent, which we'll be collecting today, patent, and plastic. Latent fingerprints are invisible to the naked eye and need to be developed so you can see them in order to collect them. Patent fingerprints are in a substance like blood. Plastic fingerprints are in a 3-dimensional substance like chocolate or putty. For the instance today, we're going to be fingerprinting this desk area. So we're going to be using magnetic fingerprint powder and a magnetic fingerprint wand. Show you how the wand works. You just have the end depressed, then it will pick up the magnetic fibers. If you pull on the end, it releases the magnetic fibers. So we'll pick up some fibers, and we're just gently going to fingerprint the surface that we're interested in. Keep in mind that the wand itself should never actually touch the table. It doesn't need to. We just want the fibers, the magnetic fibers, running over the print. We're going to clean this up a little bit before we actually collect it. Interestingly enough about fingerprints are made up of 3 things: sweat, oil, and protein. It's the oil in your fingerprints that the magnetic fibers are actually clinging to. There's many different types of fingerprint powder and tape, and the type that you use is really going to be dictated by the surface that you're printing. The tape that we're using today is called Diff Lift. What you're going to want to do is fold the end over slightly so you have an area to grab. And what I like to do is I like to look at the fingerprint that I've developed and then judge how much tape I'm actually going to need. So in this case, I'm really only going to need about 2 to 3 inches. You can see the print on the table. I'm just going to hold the end that I've folded over. Sit right down and smooth the edges down. The tape can move sometimes, so I do like to hold the corner as I smooth the tape out. We'll leave that for just a second and grab what we call a lift card. This is the back of the lift card. The front is glossy. The glossy part's where you want to put your fingerprint lift. The back is where you can draw a diagram of where you remove the lift from, and also it has many lines so you can put your case information. So I'll set the card down. The print is nice and smoothed out. I'm going to slowly peel back, grab the side, and just lay the tape right down on the back of the lift card. And again, smooth it out. So now you can see the latent fingerprint that we lifted.
Wow, so super cool. But the reason the magnetic particles stick to a fingerprint is not actually because of magnetism. Obviously, like, we're not magnetic, like in that sense. And guys, if you want to learn more about magnets, check out our magnet live stream. But magnetism is being used in this technique mainly as a clever way to control and apply the powder that we saw her applying. But the powder itself contains these tiny iron particles that are mixed with pigment. And the magnetic applicator attracts those particles, creating like a little suspended brush. And the reason why they use that is because when you move it over the surface, the particles stick preferentially to the different moisture and oils from the fingerprint, and it helps prevent any sort of smudging of the print that could be there, revealing the actual true ridge pattern. So the big advantage is that the applicator itself doesn't need to scrub across the fingerprint, and that's why you noticed in the video she said like you don't need to actually rub the applicator across the print. It's mostly just the fibers, and that also means there's going to be less chance of any sort of smearing or damaging of the print. So that's just an example of how we would potentially get a print from a fingerprint. But now I want to go over, what it means when an investigator says, they want to dust for fingerprints, because that is like, it is a huge oversimplification of what it means to actually find a fingerprint. And I just want to share my next graphic here. But essentially forensic scientists have a whole toolbox of different techniques that they use, and which one they use to get a print really depends on what kind of surface the fingerprint might be on. So if you have a porous surface like paper or cardboard, these actually absorb components from the fingerprint into the material. So investigators often use different kinds of chemical techniques that can help visualize what those prints actually look like. And then you have non-porous surfaces, like glass or metal or plastic or different kinds of ceramics. And this is where the classic fingerprint powder you see in movies might make an appearance and make more sense. These powders essentially adhere to the different components of fingerprint residue, making those ridge patterns visible. And this is a variation of the method that we just saw in the video. So that's more of that powder technique. If the fingerprint is already visible because someone touched something with a colored substance on their fingers, for instance, that's what we call a patent print. So those are different from latent prints, which aren't readily visible and have to be developed somehow. But if you have a patent print, for example, let's say, something is wet and is like made from different fluids, this is already kind of visible. And if you press your finger into something soft, like a wax or a putty type material, that could also leave a three-dimensional impression of your fingerprint. And that's something that's called a plastic print. So these are just the different types of prints that investigators and examiners look for, and different techniques of how to develop them. I'm not going to go over every single development technique, but if you want to read this in more detail, definitely get a copy of the companion pack, or just pause the screen now and take a closer look if you want to learn about it more. And yeah, it's some pretty cool stuff, Goldie, I do have to say. But what happens after they find a fingerprint? So you find a fingerprint, but you actually have to do something with it. You might not know who actually left it behind. So this is where the next step comes in. And what we might see in TV is basically like, you get a print, you pop it into some sort of computer, and then it basically just like spits out a bunch of like options of like who could be the person that this fingerprint is from. But that's not actually how real life works. And we will go over what examiners actually do. So There's something called AFIS, which stands for Automated Fingerprint Identification System. And you could basically think of it as a very sophisticated kind of fingerprint search system. The crime scene print can be digitized. So once you get your version of the fingerprint from the crime scene, you digitize it, and the system analyzes features in that fingerprint and then searches through different stored fingerprint records and looks for prints with different kinds of similar characteristics. It can also generate a list of potential candidates that appear similar to that unknown print. Once you have that potential candidate, this is where you need some sort of examiner to actually come in and verify that information. And one commonly used framework for examining fingerprints is called ACE-V, which stands for Analysis, Comparison, Evaluation, and Verification. And at a high level, basically, you have an examiner that first analyzes the crime scene print and then determines whether there's enough usable information there. Because a lot of the times you might actually have like a partial print or, a section of something which doesn't actually give any sort of useful information. So that first step is really to identify whether you have something that's actually useful and usable. And then they compare that unknown print with the candidate fingerprint and looking at those different ridge patterns and those little details that we talked about earlier to see, how they might match up with a particular match. So that's this comparison point here. And then they evaluate what that comparison actually supports. Does it actually make sense with the evidence that we're looking for and the context and the story that we're trying to paint here with regards to what happened? Or could this have been a fingerprint that is completely unrelated to the crime scene? And then finally, you have the verification step where another examiner comes in and does an independent review of those conclusions to see whether it matches up with what that first person essentially identified. And one thing about fingerprints to keep in mind is that it can be an extremely powerful tool, but it isn't a process that is completely infallible. And I do want to talk about an example of a case that happened back in 2004. So there was something called the Madrid train bombings when the FBI incorrectly identified a latent fingerprint belonging to an American lawyer named Brandon Mayfield. And then there were multiple examiners that agreed with the identification, but it did turn out to be wrong. So when the error was investigated afterwards, different issues included how similarities and differences in the prints were interpreted and the potential influence of things like confirmation bias, which is something that we've talked about before as well. So, I don't want to get too deep into that case, but I think it's an important reminder of something that we are going to see throughout the night as we go through the different kinds of evidence, which is essentially evidence can be scientific, but humans will still have to interpret what that evidence actually means and whether or not it's applicable to the case that you're looking at. There's also the situation where the database search doesn't find any useful candidates. So a fingerprint is only useful for identifying someone if you have something meaningful to compare it against. So maybe the person who left our print simply isn't represented in the database that we're searching, or maybe they are, but the crime scene print is partial, or maybe it's smudged, or otherwise doesn't contain very useful information that can produce a useful result for us. And in that situation, investigators, kind of have to leave the evidence where it is, and the print will just have to remain identified until, maybe in the future they uncover more information. Depending on the system and the investigation, sometimes an unresolved latent print can be retained for a really, really long time and years at a case, depending on the case, and then potentially searched again later. So, that's how the fingerprint identification system works. Also, another thing to keep in mind is let's say, we have our glass And we determined that the fingerprint on her glass belongs to Goldie, even though she's wearing her gloves.
What?
Do you still have them on, or did you take them off?
I took them off because I was checking my
Okay, well,
fingerprints.
that makes sense. That's why your fingerprint is on her glass.
Oh my gosh, I'm implicated in the crime scene.
What it doesn't tell us is, when she touched it, why she touched it, or whether her touching it has anything to do with her crime. So, a fingerprint can be incredibly important.
Whether anything has to do with my crime? You're already implicating me for crime. What happened to innocent before proven guilty?
I said our crime, not your crime. I mean,
crime.
like
okay,
the communal crime of investigating that crime scene.
Okay.
Yeah, but the principle I mentioned earlier on in the stream, the low card exclusion principle, if that is right, our mystery person probably left behind, more than just fingerprints. And this is where something like trace evidence comes into play. It's, trace evidence is harder to see, but it's definitely things that are relevant in a crime scene. So, Goldie, what are some examples of trace evidence that you can think of?
DNA.
Okay.
I'm thinking of the the true crime stuff that I watch, and then also like the police interrogations. So, trace evidence could be like fingerprints or DNA, whether it's like blood or I don't know, like hair samples, maybe skin samples. I sound guilty? Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. Guys, it wasn't me. I don't know what the crime was, but it wasn't me. I swear I'm innocent. Yeah, like I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I would say like examples of, was it word trace evidence?
Yeah, trace evidence. And yeah, like all of these are great examples. So trace evidence basically is just very small pieces of physical material that can potentially help connect a person or an object and a location. So
and it doesn't also have to be like DNA. So for example, I remember like I was actually just watching this one like police interrogation or whatever, and they swabbed the woman's face and fingers for like a gunpowder residue because they wanted to see if like maybe she was there when if she was the one that, let's say, fired the gun or something. So it's not just DNA, it's also like chemicals or like other things that are like non-biological trace evidence as well.
Yeah, that's gun residue can certainly be an example of trace evidence. It just means that it's very little of something. So if like it's basically a microscopic or very, very tiny trace amounts of something that can potentially lead to connecting a person to an object or a location. And so I have a few examples that we're going to talk about. And so, we're talking about things like hair or clothing fibers or like maybe tiny, tiny pieces of glass or paint or even soil that could come from, plant material or pollen. And the reason I find trace evidence interesting is that you could be carrying some of this stuff around with you right now without having any idea that it's actually there because it's so tiny and so microscopic. Just like think about everything that you've interacted with today. You've sat on furniture, perhaps. You've walked across different surfaces. Maybe you went outside. Maybe your clothes rubbed on something. Maybe you got into a car. Maybe you hugged someone, and maybe you interacted with like a pet or an animal. Every single one of those interactions creates an opportunity for tiny amounts of material to move around. So going back to our imaginary crime scene, let's say our mystery person sat on the couch. A few tiny fibers from their jacket, if they're wearing a jacket, or their shirt, could potentially end up on the couch. And then at the same time, fibers from that couch could also end up on their jacket. Now, imagine later on in the case, investigators actually get access to that jacket. Suddenly, there's a question that they're going to ask, which is, could the fibers on that jacket be associated with the fibers from the couch in our crime scene? And so the next question becomes, how do you actually analyze something that's this small? And honestly, it's really just the first simple tool is a microscope. So with fibers, sorry, I'm just trying to find the right diagram. Okay, yeah. So with fibers, for example, scientists can examine things like the color, the diameter, the different cross section, and what it looks like under a microscope. They may also use different kinds of analytical techniques when it comes to fibers to examine the material itself, including spectroscopy or other kinds of chemical methods, depending on what it is that they're trying to identify or compare the fiber to. The fiber to. Glass is also another really interesting trace piece of evidence, because let's say someone breaks a window, there's going to be these tiny fragments of glass that could potentially land on clothing or shoes or even skin. And so investigators can examine physical and optical properties of those fragments and then ask whether they're consistent with the glass that was recovered from a broken window from a particular crime scene. Same idea with paint. So imagine two cars collide, for instance, and then one driver just drives away. The tiny layers of chip within automotive paint can potentially transfer between those two vehicles. And so forensic scientists can examine the color and the layer and structure of that paint and then analyze its different chemical composition as well. So something microscopic can potentially connect two objects that did come into contact. Hair is another classic example of trace evidence. So human hair has structures like cuticles and things called cortex and medulla, which are just the different composition of what makes up a strand of hair. And characteristics such as the color and the diameter and the pigment of the hair, all of that can be examined. And then we get to one of my favorites, which is soil. So imagine our mystery person, is walking through a particular outdoor location, and then soil gets stuck to one of the treads in their shoes. Soil isn't necessarily just one uniform substance. It can contain different combinations of minerals and organic material and different kinds of microscopic organisms even. And so investigators may be able to compare soil recovered from an object with samples from a specific location and then ask whether those specific characteristics are consistent. So really, it's all about just building associations, and that's what's important to understand about trace evidence, because often we're not just talking about one piece of evidence that proves the entire case as a whole. It's more about building the connections and painting the story that could make sense to describe what happened at the crime scene. So, maybe you have a fiber that connects someone's clothing to a particular environment, and then you have glass that connects the clothing to a broken window, and then soil that connects their shoes to a particular type of location, and then something else that isn't covered later that connects everything together, for instance. And so each individual clue in and of itself might have a limitation, but together they can tell a much more interesting story. Another limitation, though, I want to talk about here as it comes to trace evidence is something called secondary transfer, which is essentially, material doesn't always transfer directly from person A to a crime scene. Sometimes you can get something called secondary transfer. So imagine Goldie is sitting on the crime scene couch and then gets one of my hairs on her jacket because I was sitting on that couch earlier. And then Goldie goes somewhere else, completely and then, commits a crime. And then one of my hairs falls from her jacket onto that crime scene. Now, all of a sudden, investigators find my hair somewhere else that I've actually never been. So finding trace evidence somewhere doesn't automatically prove that the source of that material personally deposited it there. You kind of have to think about how it could have gotten there and looking at the full picture as a whole. And so that's why context really matters as it comes to forensic science. But going back to our imaginary investigation and looking at our trace evidence, another question comes into play. And I saw people mentioning this. Goldie, people are saying I'm bullying you.
I'm used to it, guys. I'm used to it.
It's usually the other way around. So I'm having a great time.
I've literally never bullied you.
Oh my God, you bully me all the time. I'm joking. But okay, so going back to our imaginary investigation, let's say, this particular person leaves behind biological material. And this is where, DNA comes in. And I saw a lot of you talk about DNA or mention DNA in the chat. And DNA is actually one of those things which completely changed forensic science. And so let's take free Goldie, that's funny. Let's take a look at what DNA actually looks like as it comes to crime scenes. So when we're talking about finding DNA, we're talking about leaving behind something biological from our bodies. And that could be blood, it could be saliva, it could be semen, it could be skin cells, it could be tissue, any sort of hair with suitable biological material associated with it. Inside of many of those cells is something called a nucleus. Inside the nucleus are your chromosomes, and your chromosomes are made up of DNA. So we're venturing a little bit into biology now, guys. So when forensic scientists recover biological material from a crime scene, they may be able to extract DNA from the cells in that material and develop what's called a DNA profile. And this is the part I want to explain because there's a common misconception here. For standard forensic DNA profiling, investigators generally aren't sequencing your entire genome and reading all of your different genetic information. Instead, what they're doing is that they're examining specific locations in your DNA that vary significantly between different people. One of the main types of markers used in conventional DNA profiling is something called an STR, which stands for short tandem repeat. Bear with me, guys, here. So imagine we have a tiny sequence of DNA that repeats itself. So we have GATA, you can see here. And this is basically the different kinds of nucleotides that you might find in a DNA. So there's G here, there's A here, TA. So that's where those letters are coming from. And so let's say you have a tiny sequence of DNA that repeats itself. And let's say at the same location in my DNA, maybe that sequence repeats itself 8 times. So you see Rose over here has a repeat of 8. But let's say Goldie, who's right next to me, she has 11 repeats of GATA. So Goldie, you made it into my diagram. So scientists can...
Guys, everyone buy this diagram because now I'm in this diagram. There you go, guys. So
yeah. So scientists essentially look at how many repeats a person has at a particular location. One location by itself wouldn't tell us very much about a particular person. But now imagine that we are examining many different locations. So maybe my profile, looking down here, might look like, at this location, I have 8 sequences of this particular strand. Goldie has 11, and then there's an unknown sample that also has 8. And then maybe you have, 12, and then 9, and then 12, and then maybe you have 7 and 10 and 7. So it's looking at like my sequence is very similar to this unknown pattern, but take what you want about that. But our unknown crime scene sample produces its own combination, and so now we actually have something that we can compare it to. This is a really oversimplified version. Obviously, there's a lot more laboratory science involved in getting from a biological sample to an interpretable DNA profile. But for what we're looking at tonight, the important idea is that we're examining a collection of highly variable genetic markers and building a profile that can be used for identification. And when you combine information from many different informative markers, that profile can become extremely discriminating to really identify a particular person and connect them to a specific DNA that was found. So I want to play a quick video just about what this process looks like, just to help reinforce some of this, because I think that might make it a little bit easier. So this is a video. It's called DNA Fingerprinting and How It Works. STR Analysis Easily Explained.
In this video, we're going to explain what DNA fingerprinting is and how it works. In the same way that the ridges on our fingertips or the patterns in our irises differ, there are regions in our DNA that are unique. While more than 99% of the human genome is identical across all individuals, polymorphic regions vary significantly and can therefore be used to establish a DNA profile that is unique to each person. DNA fingerprinting is commonly used in forensics, a field that applies science in a legal setting. For example, investigators often collect DNA in the form of blood, hair, semen, saliva, or tissue samples from crime scenes. These samples are then analyzed, and the resulting DNA profiles can be compared with the genetic fingerprints of suspects. Paternity investigations often rely on DNA fingerprinting as well. Here, the technique is used to compare the child's DNA with the alleged father's DNA. Additionally, in situations such as natural disasters, DNA fingerprinting can be applied to teeth or bones to help identify the victims. Beyond its use in forensics, DNA fingerprinting has found applications in multiple other sectors, including diagnostics, medical research, ecology, microbiology, and genealogy. The primary method for DNA fingerprinting is STR analysis, which stands for short tandem repeat. As the name suggests, instead of analyzing all polymorphic regions, it focuses on short tandem repeats, specific loci that contain sequences of 2 to 6 base pairs that are repeated multiple times. Since the number of repeats is highly variable among individuals, and since every individual has 2 alleles of each loci, one inherited from the mother and one from the father, they provide an ideal basis for DNA fingerprinting. Here's the step-by-step process of performing STR analysis. When a sample reaches the lab, the first step is to extract DNA from the cells. To ensure that there is sufficient DNA for downstream analysis, STR sequences are amplified. In this example, we're amplifying both alleles of 2 different loci, but in reality, you would analyze many more. The STR sequences are amplified using PCR, with a specific primer pair for each locus that attaches a unique fluorescent tag to the resulting products.
So just briefly here, PCR basically allows scientists to take specific regions of DNA and then make millions of copies of them. So kind of like a molecular photocopier, if you will. You basically start with a very tiny amount of DNA and then you amplify the particular regions that you want to analyze until you have enough material to detect and then work with them.
After amplification, the DNA sample is run through a capillary gel electrophoresis system. Its capillary contains a gel that allows smaller STR sequences to travel faster through its pores. At the end of the capillary, a laser beam and a detector register the fluorescent tag of each sequence. The combination of the travel time and the color of the fluorescent signal allow the capillary gel electrophoresis system to determine the length of the STR sequences for each locus analyzed. If there are two different alleles, two fluorescent peaks will be detected. If the two alleles are identical, one fluorescent peak will be detected. The final step involves comparing the genetic fingerprint obtained with that of another sample. We hope that this video answered all your questions about.
Okay, so obviously there's some really cool chemistry happening here, but for our purposes, what we need to know, hold on, I don't like this massive question mark on screen. What we need to know is that you have a tiny DNA sample and then you go through the PCR process and then you create lots of copies of the regions that we want to analyze. And then that essentially allows us to help develop our DNA profile. So let's say we've successfully generated our DNA profile from the biological evidence that we had at our crime scene. If investigators already have a specific person that they want to compare it with, they can obtain an appropriate reference sample from that person. So through, cheek swabs or other DNA samples that they might want to get in order to compare that profile. If the profiles don't correspond, that person can potentially be excluded as the source of that particular DNA. So it would rule out a particular person. But if the profiles do correspond, that at that point that you're on the right track, but you still can't definitively say that you found your suspect, because this is where statistics become really important. And scientists evaluate how significant that correspondence of a DNA actually is. Because if we only compare one DNA marker, there could be lots of other people who happen to share that same result. But when you compare different markers together, that particular combination can become incredibly rare. So with a good DNA sample, you can sometimes get to the point where the chance of an unrelated person randomly having the same DNA profile is extremely small. And so this is what makes DNA evidence so powerful. And it's not just that two profiles appear to match, it's that we can actually use statistics to understand how significant a particular DNA match is. But what if you have this beautiful DNA profile, but we don't actually have any idea who it belongs to? In the United States, there is something called CODIS.
I thought you were going to say in the United States there's something called if the glove fits, it must acquit or something.
Or that, there could be that. But there is something called CODIS, which is the combined DNA identification system. So eligible forensic DNA profiles can be searched against appropriate database records to find potential matches. So if there is relevant corresponding information in that system, that can potentially provide investigators with a lead, and then it has to be followed and then appropriately confirmed. But if nothing is in that system, then just like our fingerprint that we might not have an existing or comparable match with, we'll just simply be left with an unknown DNA profile. Yes, Goldie.
So a quick question about this. So this CODIS, okay, so this index system, does this include all those people who like do those like DNA genealogy tests or whatever? Like ancestry.com or those sorts of things? Like when you do, like when you give your DNA sample to these commercial companies, do they also put your DNA sample in that database? Because it seems as if one of the ways that you're able to, let's say, find your, unknown relatives or extended family is by searching in that database and seeing like who you may or may not be related to. So I'm curious if that is like the same database that's being used for like criminal investigations.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think like 23andMe and Ancestry, I don't think they are included in CODIS. Consumer genealogy testing generally examines something called SNP, which is like single letter variations of DNA that are scattered through the genome. I think that's handled in a separate database, which can be used to detect like distant biological relationships, which still can be used in forensic investigations to identify, familial relationships. But I think that's handled separately from CODIS as a database. But that's a really good question. Yeah. Would you do a 23andMe or an Ancestry? Is that how
I don't know. I mean, I already know you were adopted, so there's no need to like do a genetic test on that, right? So no, I'm teasing. I don't know. I feel like, it makes sense for people who are trying to, let's say, connect with their long lost family, or if they want to find out if like someone is related to them or not. But I've never really felt the need to do that. Like, our family lineage and history is like, it's well documented, right? So I don't know, but I don't know. Would you?
So I would more be curious, not because of like finding relatives per se, but understanding like ethnical. Oh God, ethnicity. No. Like ethnicity.
Okay.
Like, ethnically, how much of like our percentage is like this kind of Persian versus that kind of Iranian. I don't know. Like I would just be interested to know the ancestral breakdown of something like that, but I wouldn't be comfortable with having my information out there. So I would be curious to know. I wouldn't want, like, if there was ever a way to do it like privately where my information would be given to some corporation, yeah, I would, but I wouldn't just do it for one of these commercial tests. Also, like for disease, not to say that like our family has any sort of major disease, thank God. But like, I don't they also sometimes say like your chances of getting this particular ailment based on your DNA or genome? I don't know. I think that would be just.
That's true. Yeah, that is a good point.
Interesting. But I wouldn't be comfortable with my data just being out there and like someone having such personal genetic identifiable information about me.
To be fair, they have all of our other information anyway, right? The fact that like we literally use our fingerprints to log into our, I do anyway, like I use my fingerprints to log into my phone, for example, right? Or, all these sorts of things. So, at this point, it's like big data already has all the info.
That's true. But yeah, that was a good question. But yeah, so essentially CODIS is used by forensic investigators to try to find, any sort of leads for any sort of existing matches. But if nothing's there, then it's just treated as unknown DNA profile. But, the evidence can potentially become useful later. Maybe investigators identify eventually, a suspect at a point in the future and obtain a reference sample that ends up being a match with that DNA. or maybe there's another investigation that's happening simultaneously or at another time that has a corresponding forensic profile, and then maybe new information becomes available later at some point in the future. So just because something doesn't exist now, it is something, that can certainly become available later, depending on what other investigations are happening. This is also the reason why some very old evidence can sometimes become incredibly useful years later, and why some old cold cases now are becoming solved because DNA that's been sitting in a container, for years and years, and some unsolved crimes are becoming useful today with some of the discoveries of these new technologies, and we can find some of these perpetrators. Now, because DNA can be so discriminating and really identify a particular person, it is tempting to say, if you do find DNA at a crime scene, that's it. You found your person. Although DNA can give us very strong information about whose biological material we're dealing with, secondary transfer can also be, something that we'll have to consider for DNA as well, because similar to trace evidence, DNA can potentially also be transferred indirectly. So imagine, Goldie, I shake your hand, some biological material from me could potentially transfer onto you, and then you touch another object and then do something, you delete someone, and then, that could potentially implicate me in that particular deletion. Under certain circumstances, material originating from me could potentially end up on that object, even though I never touched it myself. So that's something to consider as well. And then just one last piece worth mentioning as it comes to DNA specifically is that crime scene DNA also isn't always a super nice, clean sample of one particular individual. Sometimes you get a mixture of a bunch of different people. So meaning different DNA from different people is present at the crime scene. So, thinking about a relatively common object like a TV remote, for example, how many people might have touched that remote? You have a bunch of different DNA potentially on that particular piece of evidence. And so now investigators have these multiple DNA contributors mixed together, and they're going to have to be able to make interpretations that are considerably more complicated in that sense. So DNA is incredibly powerful, and it can be extremely good at helping answer whose biological material was there or might be at the scene. But by itself, it doesn't necessarily tell you when something was deposited or how it was deposited or why it was there. And that's where we'll get into another area of forensic science, which you've probably seen on TV, specifically Dexter, if you've seen Dexter, one of my favorite shows. Goldie, have you seen Dexter?
I have. I've seen the first few seasons of Dexter. Actually, no, I think I've seen 5 or 6 seasons of Dexter. I'm almost towards the end.
Oh, no way. Okay. I love Dexter. I really loved it until I think season 3 with the Trinity killer. I still watched the rest, but after that season, it just didn't feel the same to me. But I really loved the first 3 seasons. But on that note, let's move on to bloodstain pattern analysis. So the basic idea behind bloodstain patterns is pretty interesting, because once blood leaves our body, we're essentially dealing with a fluid. So this means that fluid mechanics comes into the picture. We're essentially dealing with physics now. We're dealing with gravity, and we're dealing with surface tension. And the force acting on the fluid, blood in this case, matters. And even the type of surface that it eventually lands on can have an effect on what that particular stain looks like. So under the appropriate circumstances, investigators can look at the size or the shape or the distribution of a particular blood stain pattern, and then potentially learn something about how that blood was moving. And so let's take a look at an example here. So over here, let's start with the impact angle and what this actually means. And so, guys, we've covered chemistry, we've covered biology, and now we're getting into physics. So if a droplet falls straight down and hits a smooth surface at approximately 90 degrees, you can see that resulting stain is relatively circular. So it's going to be like a circle. But as we change that angle, the shape of that blood stain is going to be looking different. So at 60 degrees, it starts to become more elliptical. At 30 degrees, it's even more elongated. And then by the time we're around 15 degrees, we've got this really stretched out stain here. And so generally, when an appropriate elliptical blood stain pattern, the more acute the angle, it means, the more elongated that stain becomes. So acute meaning it's closer to that horizontal level. So the more acute, the more elongated your pattern is going to become. And that means that the shape itself contains an incredible amount of information. So we can potentially use geometry of the stain to estimate the impact angle. And there's, some really straightforward trigonometry here. And, I'm not going to get too into the math behind this, but if you even look at our example down here, so let's say we've got this elliptical stain here that's about 5 millimeters wide and about 10 millimeters long. And so, we divide the width by the length, which gives us 0.5. So 5 divided by 10 is 0.5. And then we take the inverse sine of that. And this gives us an impact angle of about 30 degrees. So by identifying the width and the length and taking the inverse sine, we can get the angle of impact of that particular pattern. I promise that's as much trigonometry as I'm going to do this evening.
So I'll tell you something. I mean, I did trig back in high school. I don't remember any of it. All I remember is SOHCAHTOA, and I don't remember what SO or KA or TOA is. So don't ask me about that. But I do see the practical impact of this, right? So this is the like the mathematical calculations, or this is where the physics aspect comes in, because once you're able to determine the angle, that then allows you to sort of place where the blood was let, right? So, where was that person when, the blood was splattered, and, what angle or what direction was the splatter in, or something like that, or like how the attack happened, or, something like that, right? So this is important because it helps to retrace and recreate what probably happened during that crime scene.
Excellent, Goldie. Yes, A+ for you. So
there we go.
yeah. The physical shape left behind by a moving droplet and using the geometry will help us learn something about its trajectory and how it actually, what had to have happened to create this sort of pattern. And so the stain can certainly give us information about the direction of travel as well. So if you look at the elongated stain here, you can see that it's also not perfectly symmetrical from this side versus this side. And so you'll understand what the direction of travel potentially was versus when you look at the rounded end versus the tapered end. And so once you have like all of these multiple suitable stains, you can potentially start to look at the larger blood stain pattern to start painting that picture of, what might have actually happened here. So trying to decipher that pattern can look something like this. So if we look at the left side here, we have a number of these elongated stains kind of traveling in different directions. And so analysts can examine the direction of information from the different appropriate stains and trace their axes back to a specific point here. So tracing all of that, you get to this point, which is your area of convergence, which is essentially giving us information in 2 dimensions of where, that particular impact could have started from. But investigators also use the impact angles to start to work backwards in 3 dimensions to estimate a region specifically in space of where that blood may have originated. And that's where we get this area of origin here, which is basically a region that we're estimating based on the available evidence that we have and the pattern of blood pointing to the physical location in space of where a particular blood stain may have originated. Now, looking at the other side of the graphic here on the right, analysts also consider something called passive stains, which is where gravity is essentially doing the work here. So you basically have blood dropping straight down. This is kind of the easiest example. So that would be a passive blood stain. And then you have transfer stains, which is a blood-bearing surface physically contacting another surface, which can leave an impression or a smear. And this is where you can get like a bloody fingerprint or something like that, blood wiping from one surface to another. And then you could also have things called cast-offs, which is where blood is released from a moving blood-bearing object that travels through the air before it lands somewhere else. So these are the different kinds of things that can cause additional blood patterns at a crime scene. And so when investigators are looking at the scene at a whole, they're not necessarily looking at one individual droplet of blood in isolation. They're certainly looking at the overall pattern. And that's how bloodstain patterns work. And Dexter was a blood splatter analyst. Say that 5 times fast. Blood splatter.
Blood splatter analyst, 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 blood splatter analyst.
Okay, well, I just had to say blood splatter, but that's fine.
Blood splatter, blood splatter, blood splatter, blood splatter, blood splatter, blood splatter. There you go.
Okay, well, you are very good, Goldie. Better than a better speaker than I am, but just another thing to consider when it comes to analyzing blood splatter is patterns can overlap sometimes. So stains can also be incomplete or distorted, and sometimes different events can produce patterns with similar characteristics. So blood splatter analysts can potentially help investigators identify the possible explanations for how blood moved and how a pattern might have been created. But it doesn't always give us a perfect video replay of an event. But it does fit with the theme that we've been going over all night, which is that forensic evidence gives us a piece of the story. So all of these different pieces of evidence can start to shape what that picture can look like. But we still have to be very careful about, how much of that story we claim can come from a specific piece of evidence. So next, we're actually going to get into firearm examinations and ballistics, which I think is also pretty interesting. So this is basically so ballistic evidence is basically firearm evidence. And the question here when we investigate this is, can investigators potentially connect a fired bullet or a cartridge to a particular firearm? And what can they learn about the path of a specific projectile that might have traveled? So let's start with the bullet. Goldie, have you shot a rifle before?
I have.
Ooh, when?
A couple of years ago, I went to a gun range with a friend.
That's fun. Did you like it?
It was a lot of fun. Apparently, I'm very good. It was my first time shooting a gun, and they were surprised at how accurate I was. It was the whole thing with the target and the image of the man or whatever. And the first few times I didn't really know what I was doing, but then when I got the hang of it, apparently I was really good with a Glock. So just saying.
Wow. Okay. Well, guys, be careful and don't mess with Goldie
Don't worry, I don't have any firearms.
I mean, we are in Canada. There are specific restrictions in Canada as it comes to firearm possession, but there are ways to get around some legal, there are legal ways for Canadians to have some sorts of firearms. Don't ask me those details because I don't know. But yes, there's something called a PAL license, right? PAL? I think that's in Canada. Or am I making that up? Let me look this up real quick. Are there any Canadians in the chat? PAL license. Yes, possession and acquisition license is a legal permit required to own by firearms and ammunition in Canada. So there you go. Confirming. Okay, so let's start with the bullets. So inside the barrel of many firearms, you have these like spiral features called rifling. And so you have these areas called lands and grooves. And the rifling causes the bullet to spin as it travels through the barrel, which also helps stabilize it in flight. And as the bullet travels through the barrel, the surfaces of the bullet and the barrel interact with one another. And you have these different microscopic imperfections and characteristics inside the barrel that can potentially leave markings on the bullet itself. And so, if investigators also have a firearm that they want to examine, they can obtain appropriate comparison specimen under different controlled laboratory conditions to be able to compare the markings of a particular barrel to an ejected bullet that they think might have come from that particular firearm. And so historically, one of the classic tools for doing this is something called a comparison microscope, which you can see here. And so this allows an examiner to view two objects side by side. And so they could look at the microscope markings on the questioned bullet versus, the markings on a known bullet. And you can kind of see whether these might have come from the same firearm. And it's not just the bullet that they're looking at. They're also looking at the cartridge case itself. So this is the base view of the cartridge, which is the underside of it. And so this could also contain useful information too. So when a firearm is discharged, you have different components of the firearm that are interacting with the cartridge. And those interactions can produce some of these different markings. So you have these breech face marks, you have potentially fire pin impressions, and you have potentially extractor or ejector marks, just depending on the firearm being used. And so investigators may recover a cartridge case from a scene and then examine these microscopic features as well to identify, whether this is related to a particular firearm. And, an important distinction I just want to make here is that some characteristics are shared by an entire group of firearms. So, for example, the number and dimensions of different lands and grooves over here that we saw, and the rifling twist can be, a class characteristics associated with a particular firearm design. So it doesn't necessarily narrow it down to one specific firearm, but those features can help with narrowing down what it is that we're dealing with. But they might not always necessarily identify one specific firearm. Another piece of evidence that they look at is the trajectory. So, where did the projectile potentially travel? And if investigators have the appropriate physical evidence showing where a projectile interacted with objects or surfaces, they may be able to estimate different aspects of its trajectory as well. And then depending on the scene, they can potentially help investigators evaluate questions about, where the origins of a particular perpetrator might have been for them to shoot a specific bullet from a firearm. And then Goldie, the last piece here is what you mentioned earlier in the stream, which is the gunshot residue. So when a firearm is discharged, very small particles produced can be kind of discharged and deposited on nearby surfaces, whether it's within the room or potentially on a person themselves. So investigators may also collect different samples and use different analytical techniques to examine particles and their elemental composition. But, you know, similar to the other pieces of evidence that we spoke about tonight, finding particles consistent with gunshot residue doesn't automatically tell us the entire story, because again, the context matters. So really similar to everything else, it's about what the full picture is painting. And this is just another tool that forensic investigators have in their toolbox to identify, you know, what could have happened at the scene of a crime.
Can you explain that part again, part 2?
The microscopic comparison?
And the microscopic comparison in the case.
And the cartridge case? Okay, so basically, there's something called a comparison microscope. And so this allows examiners to kind of view two different objects side by side. So it's a kind of microscope that examiners have. And so examiners can look at the questioned bullet, which is, the bullet in question, which might have come from a crime scene. And they want to compare that to a bullet that, you know, is used from a similar firearm. And they want to kind of compare whether the details of a particular bullet might be similar to the comparison. And so in order to do that, they use this microscope to identify the markings and look at the two different things side by side to identify, does this, you know, suspect bullet, is this relatively similar to what we think it could have been originally? Do those markings match up? In tandem, they also look at the cartridge case of the bullet itself. So when a bullet is shot from the barrel of a firearm, you have specific imprints and impressions that could be carved out onto the casing of the bullet, depending on the barrel. So as it shoots through the barrel, it doesn't come out perfectly. There could be different markings that come out onto the casing, depending on how it was fired or, you know, the class of particular firearm. All of these can help identify the potential firearm that was used. So when, you know, you find a bullet, you have to identify what firearm could have this come from. So you take all of that evidence and you identify, you know, the impressions and the markings, and you kind of hopefully narrow down your search by comparing it to existing bullets and seeing whether the patterns might be relatively similar to what you might be looking for.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, so the next piece of evidence that I want us to look at is outside of the actual room, but, you know, it could actually be inside the human body, because we've looked at all of the different things that our environment can tell us, but there's also a lot of evidence that someone's body can also leave behind. And so this is where forensic toxicology actually comes into play. And toxicology itself is essentially the study of how drugs and different chemicals and other substances kind of interact with a human body. And forensic toxicology specifically is, you know, asking questions like, you know, in someone's body, was there a particular drug present? Was there alcohol present? How much of a particular substance might have been present in someone's body? You know, what was the concentration of the different substances, and what does all of that actually mean? So depending on the investigations, toxicologists can actually analyze different kinds of biological samples. So depending on, you know, what's going on, you might have different kinds of samples that investigators might want to analyze. Blood obviously is going to be one of the most common. So, blood itself can provide a lot of information about the different substances that are circulating inside of our bodies, and what composition of things might be currently in our bodies right now. Urine can also be, really useful, particularly because different kinds of drugs break down differently. And a lot of the excrements of drugs can be found in urine. And this is why, if you might go for a drug test somewhere, they might ask for a urine sample or something like that, because it's quite obvious to find a lot of things within urine. Hair can also provide information about different kinds of long-term exposure over a long period of time as well. And then after death, toxicologists may also analyze other samples as well, including different kinds of tissues that, could change depending on what might be happening within someone's body. And then there's also something called vitreous humor, which I think is really interesting, which is it's this clear gel in the back of your eye. It's relatively isolated and can sometimes be less affected by some certain postmortem changes. And it can be particularly useful in different forensic investigations as well. So investigators essentially have these different kinds of biological windows into what was happening chemically inside a human body based on which piece of biological sample that they test on. But how do you actually specifically find a particular drug in a human body? Goldie, have you done a drug test before?
No.
Okay, well, you're doing one tonight. I'm sending you samples.
Sure. I don't have anything to hide.
Great. You're going to hear a knock on the door in a couple minutes. There's going to be
good. I always pass all my tests with flying colors.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Good for you. I'm proud of you. But okay, so the way in which we actually find a drug in a human body is through some of these chemical processes. And this is where the chemistry gets really cool, because, imagine you have a tube of blood. There could be thousands of different chemical compounds that are actually in the blood. And the substance that we're interested in, might be present at a very, very low concentration. So how do you actually go about finding that particular substance or chemical in someone's blood? And so very broadly speaking, toxicology testing often involves some sort of combination of screening and more specific analysis. So a screening test essentially helps with indicating what kind of substances might be immediately present. But if we do try to find, if we need to identify a particular compound with more confidence, scientists have to use some of these analytical instruments. So these are two very common ones, which you might have heard before. So there's chromatography and there's also mass spectrometry. And I'm not going to, go into too much detail about how these actually work, but the ideas themselves are relatively intuitive. So chromatography is essentially separating mixtures. So let's say our sample contains a whole mixture of different chemical compounds and elements. Chromatography essentially helps separate those chemicals between one another. So different compounds interact differently with different systems so that, they can move at different rates. And chromatography essentially helps us with separating out what those chemicals actually are. Once you've separated those chemicals, that's where mass spectrometry comes in. And a mass spectrometer can help with identifying the different compounds based on what their properties are. So this is where you can actually identify what it is that you're looking at. And so when you combine these two technologies, you get, different techniques like gas chromatography or liquid chromatography combined with mass spectrometry to identify, first separating the materials and then identifying like the profile of the particular chemical that you're looking at. But, obviously finding something doesn't mean that it necessarily caused death in someone. So interpretation of those chemical compounds is also very important. And that's when you have to ask more questions like the ones I have here, like, what was the concentration of a particular substance that you found in someone's biological sample? Was it based on any sort of therapeutic use? Was this person on prescribed medication? Is it something that is at toxic levels? Were there other substances present? And what was the interaction between that particular substance with the drug? So sometimes there can be, conflicting issues when drugs are combined in that way. So, looking at all of these things and asking those questions also helps identify what could have happened, or like, whether someone was poisoned, or, what might have happened after someone's death, or whether a particular substance caused someone's death. Goldie, was that a raised hand?
Yeah. How do they get the liquid in the back of the eye? Like, ugh, like what, they put a needle in there, they poke the eye to get the liquid out? Like, what is that?
That's a great question. If I was to guess, I would say yeah, but let me look that up right now.
I mean, I'm assuming it's probably like someone who's deceased, right? Because I don't
think yeah, this is on dead people.
Okay, so this is okay. If it's on dead people, then that
I mean, like,
question. But I was just like, I don't know of any living person who would want to, have their retina extracted.
Yeah, so I'm looking it up right now. It says vitreous humor is extracted either post-mortem for forensic analysis using a needle and syringe, or surgically during a medical procedure called a vitrectomy. So yeah, it's not something, I mean, like technically you could do it to someone who's alive, but that would be sick. I wouldn't recommend that. But yeah, like what's interesting here is that the like different biological samples paint different stories and paint different pictures of what might have happened at a particular time post-mortem. And after death, you have concentrations of some substances that can even like redistribute or change once a body is technically dead. And so this is actually a phenomenon called post-mortem redistribution. And, this is one reason why toxicology has historically been so important in criminal investigations, because some toxic substances don't necessarily produce an obvious external sign that immediately tells us investigators that like this person was poisoned. You do need to do that chemical testing. But you're looking for really trace pieces of evidence of things that are inside the body. So before we were looking at all of the things, trace pieces of evidence outside and like in the room, but now we're doing that same thing, but inside someone's actual body. And again, like most of these things are done post-mortem, especially the vitreous humor. But, toxicology through blood and urine and hair can certainly happen. You don't have to be dead for something like that. But, this also leads us to the next piece, which is identifying clues around when death actually occurred. So unless someone actually witnesses a death, or we have some other reliable evidence establishing when time of death actually occurred, forensic scientists are usually trying to estimate something post-interval, or PMI, which is basically how much time has taken place since death actually occurred. And so investigators can look at multiple changes that are happening to the body after death, and a lot of different things happen once a body physically dies, and combining that information with the circumstances and the environment help paint the picture of when that time of death actually occurred. And so there's a few different things that we're going to look at, which you might have heard of, especially rigor mortis, but these are all different things that happen within a body after death. So the first one is algor mortis, which is basically the cooling of a body after death. So after death, obviously, the body stops regulating at its normal internal temperature the way a living body does. And over time, the body temperature generally begins moving towards the temperature of whatever the environment is. So whatever the surrounding environment is, that's the temperature that the body will kind of equalize at. And how quickly a body loses heat depends on a huge number of things, like what the surrounding temperature of the room is, whether the body was indoors or outdoors, how much clothing a particular person might have been wearing, how large a particular body is. All of those things I can identify how fast and how quickly a body loses its original temperature of when they were, the regular temperature that we all have when we're alive. So that's the first piece, which is algor mortis. Next, you have liver mortis, which is blood settling. And this is where gravity comes back into play. So something that happens after you die, obviously your heart stops pumping. There's going to be no longer any blood being actively circulating in your body. And gravity starts to pull everything down. So it's pulling all of the blood towards the lower portions of your body. And this can produce these kind of reddish, purplish discoloration areas within a body. And so this also can potentially tell investigators, whether someone has been repositioned after death. So based on some of this pooling and settling of the blood, investigators can also identify whether someone was originally moved after their time of death to a different specific position. For example, if this pattern doesn't make sense for the position that a body was found, that could raise questions about, suspicious behavior potentially. And then lastly, we have rigor mortis, which is the stiffening of the muscles. And this might be the most famous example that a lot of people have heard of. But essentially, after death, muscles eventually become very stiff. And the reason behind this, again, comes to more chemistry. We have something called ATP within our muscles, which is essentially the molecules that our cell uses up for immediate energy. Without ATP, the muscle proteins, specifically actin and myosin, are, those two become locked together. So without ATP, these two lock together, and this causes muscles to become really stiff. And this is essentially rigor mortis. Eventually, this begins to loosen back up again. So a period of time after death, the body is still relatively movable, and then rigor mortis happens, but then this eventually breaks down again, and then that rigidity disappears. So as more and more time passes, other postmortem changes also become increasingly relevant within a body. And that leads us to decomposition, which is essentially, how fast a body begins to rot. So obviously after death, our bodies go through significant changes, both biologically and chemically. Like cells begin to break down, bacteria starts to grow and contribute to increasing rotting within a body. Over time, you can see changes in other things like color and, gases accumulating in someone's tissues, and smells and more advanced decomposition. It also depends what environment you're in. Like if you're somewhere really hot, that can, drastically change the rates of decomposition compared to a colder environment as well. So environment also really matters with the rates of decomposition. Moisture is a really big one. And all of these different factors can help investigators identify the timing of death. So when like how long someone, has been actually dead for. And, there's also insects here. Goldie, how do you think insects come into play?
I mean, I'm thinking like larvae and, things like that, maggots, right? Like all of these insects that basically assist with breaking down tissue and decomposition. It's part of the the food chain, I guess. I don't know. It's part of the way that the ecosystem works, because you need to have those insects and bacteria that are able to break down tissue and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, you're right on the ball here, Goldie. So the next thing we're actually going to talk about is etymology and entomology. Entomology. I hope I'm saying that right. Which is forensic entomology, which is basically the use of insect science in legal investigations, which is kind of gross. So I'm going to try to not linger on this topic for too long, but it is, important as it comes to forensic investigations. Look at this beautiful graphic here. I know. Wonderful, right? So, so specifically, we're going to talk about the blowfly for this example. But yeah, so it's essentially using, bugs to help figure out in, forensic investigation. But certain blowflies are extremely good at detecting decomposing remains. So the blowflies can kind of locate a particular dead body. And then under suitable conditions, they can arrive relatively early to that particular dead remain and then lay their eggs. Those eggs hatch into larvae. The larvae grow, they develop, and they eventually form pupae. And then ultimately, they emerge as adult flies. So these insects obviously don't develop randomly. So different species have different characteristic patterns and different rates of development. And those rates are strongly affected by temperature as well. So if forensic entomologists recover insects associated with a particular remain, they might be able to identify the species and then determine at what specific developmental stage that species of insect is in. That combined with looking at the temperature and the environment, all of that together can help with determining how long, again, someone's potentially been dead for because of the developmental stage of some of these insects. But again, similar to everything we've been talking about tonight, the context is key here. So you can see, some of the different factors that are crucial here, which is, what is the temperature? What's the surrounding temperature? How easy was it for the particular insect to access that person? Was the person outside or were they indoors? And all of this could help determine how accurate some of these interpretations could be, because even though a blowfly can identify, a dead remain relatively quickly, it's also important to know how easily accessible it was for that particular insect to reach that body. So again, entomology is just one other biological source of information that investigators can use to combine with everything else that they've learned. But let's say a lot of time has passed since someone has passed, and investigators no longer have these regular sorts of biological material that we've been talking about since time of death. In some cases, what remains is primarily the skeleton. And so this is where forensic anthropology can become incredibly useful. And so I'm going to switch away from this disgusting screen and share this tab instead, which is a lot nicer in my opinion. Yeah, I've definitely grossed out Goldie. She ran away. But yeah, that was really gross. I did not want to linger on that. But okay, so next up we have bones, because bones can also paint an incredibly useful picture here. So what can you actually learn from a skeleton? One of the first things that anthropologists may develop is what's called a biological profile, which can be developed from a particular skeleton. Very broadly, this includes things like estimates related to age, biological sex, stature, population, or ancestral, any sort of ancestral information based on what a specific skeleton looks like. Different parts of the skeleton obviously provides different pieces of information. So for example, the pelvis is particularly informative when identifying sex, because, you know, in adult skeletal remains, there are different anatomical differences between, you know, what constitutes a pelvis that's appropriate for reproduction, for example. And so you're able to identify biological sex in that way.
Yeah, don't tell the woke leftists that. Sorry.
Yeah, so you know, it's something that science just describes, like
it's true, right? And the difference is that women have wider pelvises because that allows the baby's skull to come through. So that's how you literally, like, the way you can detect between a man and a woman is through the shape of the pelvis.
That's definitely one of the biological markers to create that biological profile. And very similarly, age can also be estimated also by looking at different skeletal changes that happen as we develop and as we age. So age is another thing that can identify whether this was a child or, like, you know, an older person or like a middle-aged person. And then long bones and like the length of bones can help identify stature. So, you know, was this a tall person? Was this a short person? All of that can help identify and paint the picture of what someone looked like. And then bones can also have more individualized clues. So let's say someone had like a fracture at some point, or let's say someone had, like, you know, a knee replacement surgery at one point and was being held together by medical hardware in their body. All of this could also paint a particular picture of, you know, who this particular person was. Teeth can also be particularly useful here because dental work and different dental records may also provide information that can be compared to records of when someone was alive. And so the skeleton can also, you know, contain evidence of different trauma as well, that investigators can look and identify whether these were traumas that happened, you know, around the time of someone's death, whether they were things that were from a lot, you know, prior to someone's death, or whether it's something that happened even after someone's death. So all of this can help investigators identify how long ago someone passed, and even help paint a picture of, you know, who this particular skeleton could have been. Also, what's important about skeletons is that bones, like teeth, can sometimes protect DNA a lot longer after all the soft tissue has degraded. So skeletal remains can also still potentially provide both anatomical and genetic evidence that can help with identification as well. So let's say it's a bones from a really long time, you're not going to have any of that soft tissue anymore, but the bones and the teeth especially can still help with some of that DNA testing as well.
Skeletons are also very important during Halloween.
Yes, they were. Do you remember Jack Skellington? He was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay. There's one final major category that I want to talk about, because in 2026, most of us are leaving behind, a specific piece of evidence, usually. So what is it? Can anyone guess what I'm talking about? What piece of evidence have we not talked about yet?
Our online presence. Like the digital forensics. That's what I would call it, if that's what I was going to guess.
Yes. Laser 8776. Good job. You got it. Old Blind, he said, sorry, wrong comment. Oh, Old Blind, he said gamma rays. That's funny.
I've done that too sometimes when the chat like is going by really quickly. I've like highlighted the wrong comment, and oh my gosh, Rose, like once in a while, like I share a comment and it's like a troll and I have to like immediately remove it. I'm like, oh my God. And I just like pretend like it didn't happen.
I know, that's funny.
There you go. Welcome to YouTube streamer problems. But yeah, sometimes the chat goes so quickly, you highlight the wrong one.
Some people are saying skin cells, but guys, we did cover skin cells essentially under trace evidence. So trace evidence, skin cells, that's basically what could be associated with trace evidence. But
yeah, we haven't talked about the digital one because again, going to the true crime stuff, right? Like the police are like, we have the evidence from your phone and the electric signals and like, like the cell signals and where you were at what time based on your phone signals or whatever. So
exactly.
I was waiting for the digital one.
Yeah. So yeah, in modern investigations, we actually have access to an entirely different category of evidence that Locard, who originally came up with the Locard exclusion principle, couldn't have even imagined, but it's still relevant today. When he came up with his principle more than a century ago, there wasn't digital evidence available because, just think about all of the information that we're all generating on not only at like a day-to-day basis, but like most of the time on like a minute-to-minute basis as we're going through a normal day. So imagine investigators trying to reconstruct a suspect's potential movements. So, maybe their phone contains relevant location information. Maybe there was a security camera that shows them at a particular location at a particular place and time. Maybe there was a message that someone sent to them that establishes some form of communication with someone else. Maybe there was a photograph that was taken that shows metadata that was, created at a specific instance. All of this different kind of information from different sources starts to build a timeline of what could have actually happened. There's also app information and app data as well. Yes, Goldie.
So I just want to share an experience I had. So this is back when I was still I was an elected official. It was probably like the second or third year of when I was elected to office. And so my constituency office, we installed cameras, right? So we had like 3 or 4 security cameras, cameras that both pointed inwards, like into the office, but also pointed outwards. And I recall like, again, this was like, within the first few years of me being elected, one day, like I'm just there with my staff and we're all working, doing whatever. And then literally like 4 police officers walk in. And of course, my receptionist was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Right. Because it had never really happened. And then basically, the police were, amazing. Ottawa police is phenomenal. They were so nice. They were, everything was great. But what was really interesting is that they were like, there was a theft last night in the plaza where your constituency office is, and your security, like you have security cameras that are facing outwards. So we want to know if we can like monitor the security camera footage to see if we can like, identify the vehicle or trace the vehicle or something. And then what's really interesting is that they, so they were in like the back room with the security cameras for hours. And then they eventually found that clip and they were able to like identify the vehicle or whatever for the break-in for like another store. And this was like, 10 years ago or something. But everyone has Ring cameras too, right? So it's not just like random security cameras, but it's the Ring camera on people's front doors. And so like that's a huge part of this digital trail, where we might think that no one is watching us or we're not being filmed, but how do we know that there isn't like a Ring camera or a security service? Or now, when we're speaking of, let's say geopolitics, United States has Space Force, right? So Space Force, you literally have cameras from space that are so detailed that they can, see someone's like name on a badge or something. So the digital trail is much bigger than people I think realize. And just given the fact that everyone has like Ring cameras or whatever, that I believe has fundamentally changed how the science of forensics operates these days.
Yeah, that's really cool, Goldie. So it's impressive that you're able to help solve that case too. But yeah, that just goes to show you never know who might be watching. And like beyond just the ring cameras, there's also like just other hidden cameras maybe potentially in the area as well that you might not necessarily know, or other security cameras or just other forms of surveillance that just might be happening in and around, which aren't super obvious to someone, but can certainly be recorded. Yes, Goldie?
So there's actually another form of surveillance that's not here, but I learned about this in my law of evidence class.
Tell me.
It's heat.
Oh, okay.
So I read about, these cases in, in Canada. I'm sure in the United States it's the same way, because, it's sort of similar, when it comes to getting search warrants to invade someone's privacy, let's say. But a lot of times police officers, they will get a court ordered, warrant that will allow them to do like an infrared scan inside of like a home or a location or something to identify where people are and what they are doing. And we're going back like 15 years ago now to like when I was in law school, but it's essentially, right, that's considered an invasion of privacy, because when you are scanning the heat signals to see where people are or what they are doing, because it's within the home, that's considered an invasion of privacy. So you need a court order for that. Now, usually these heat, these like thermal search warrants are granted when police are, they suspect a house of being like a grow op or something, right? So they're doing like a heat scan to see if there's like this underground room with like a lot of light where they're, growing marijuana or things like that. But it's very interesting how technology is used, in the science of forensics. So I kind of remember that. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but like this whole like heat scan thing, I've always found that really interesting as well.
So this reminds me of a case which I want to mention, and it's actually a case that is relatively close to where we grew up. And guys, let me know in the chat if any of you have heard about this. So there's a Netflix documentary about this girl. So her name is Jennifer Pan. And I'll look up what the Netflix documentary was. But so she's from Markham, Ontario. Basically, like she had.
I would say scroll down a little bit. You don't want the YouTube AI to get you. Yeah, there you go. Just get rid of the title, and then the rest of this should be okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Well, it's just for your own, because I've been like banned for less.
This is all for educational purposes.
Yeah, the AI algorithm doesn't care.
Yeah, okay. So Jennifer basically was not getting along well with her parents. And so her parents were basically like, she had this boyfriend who the parents also didn't like. And so the parents were basically like, either choose us and like continue to live with us at home, or like go and like we'll disown you and start your life with your boyfriend. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. So she was like, no, I want to live with my parents, but also keep dating this guy. But eventually, after some time, she got sick and tired of her parents. But instead of deciding to like move out, for whatever reason, she hired like these murder for hire people, and then they ended up deleting her parents, or trying to delete her parents. Her mom ended up being deleted. Her dad ended up surviving, and but he was, you know, like he had terrible injuries. Anyways, as part, and this is really cool, and also Jim Can't Swim, JCS, the guy I spoke earlier, also covered. There's an episode about this specific case and the cops interrogating her. As part of the police interrogation, they were telling her about how, like, they were trying to get a confession, and she was like, deny, 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 but like they knew it was her. As part of the police interrogation, at one point, one of the investigators told her that, oh, you know, like we have these really powerful techniques in investigations now where we're able to have satellites and look into your home using infrared technology and cameras, and we're able to know who was in your home at a particular time. And we know there was more than just, you know, this person in your home. There was like all these people, and we know you were moving around the house because we had these infrared cameras that were looking at your home at the time. So that basically wasn't the case. So even though that technology may exist, the investigators were basically like pulling her leg to get her to confess to that specific crime. And then that was eventually one of the things that broke her, and ended up like in her head, she's like, oh, they know anyway. So like, there's nothing I could do now but then to actually confess to this crime or whatever. But that's what your example reminded me of. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, wow, like, yeah, like the police would need like a court, like they would need a warrant for that, because you can't just do like a thermal scan inside someone's house without like a court order. It actually went to court and like it was like determined or something. But very interesting that they still kind of use the tactic to like, you know, get people to confess. I mean, good for them.
Yeah, very interesting, but like obviously sad case. Check out the Netflix documentary. Let's see if I can find the name here.
I didn't know there was a Netflix documentary.
Yeah, there's a Netflix documentary. What Jennifer Did.
Wow.
And then there's also the JCS, Jim Can't Swim video specifically on the police interrogation, which was also really interesting. But yeah, I don't have IR on this digital trail. Like, sorry, by IR I meant.
No, that's okay. I think IR is kind of before. I would say IR is before the digital trail, but it sort of ties into more the digital side. So I just kind of wanted to add that. I would say it's like an ancestor of the digital trail.
Yeah. I think what's important about infrared is that can certainly help if you know a particular crime could happen, but you can't necessarily apply it retroactively.
No, you can't. It's more used for like to scan a house to see if there's like a grow op there. Mostly it's used for like, you know, grow ops and stuff.
Super interesting. But yeah, like basically depending on, you know, like digitally speaking, what kind of devices might have been available, what data you might have been able to recover from like storage or backups, whether it's like physical storage devices or cloud service storage, any sort of system records or app data. All of this can kind of help paint that digital trail. Of course, what investigators can actually access depends on the specific technology that they're looking at and what data might be necessarily available to them, and specific legal authorities are also important here as well. But, you know, it's not necessarily just one digital clue. It's the collection of all of the different digital trails potentially being corroborating one another. Like your phone messages might show you in one particular area, and then you might have been recorded on a camera in another area. Maybe there was a transaction that happened at a particular ATM or, you know, point of sale machine that also puts you in another location, and, you know, a message that establishes communication that happened. All of this kind of paints the picture of what that digital trail looks like. And investigators, based on that, could potentially reconstruct parts of the timeline without necessarily having to fully rely on someone's memory of what might have happened. So this is how digital evidence comes into play. And one thing to keep in mind, guys, deleting something doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone forever. Investigators do have ways of bringing things back and recovering data, if not fully, then partially as well. So just another thing to keep in mind as well. It's hard to delete everything digitally all the time, unless you're an expert like Goldie.
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So much shade tonight. Guys, should I tell her? You know what? She's been teasing me all night and I still haven't told her.
Told me what?
I'm not going to tell you.
What?
I'm not going to tell you.
Oh no. Guys, tell me. Tell me in the chat. What is she talking about?
She's been making fun of me all this time. Meanwhile, we all know what happened. We're not going to tell her.
What?
We're gonna make her go and rewatch the live stream
to
know what we're talking about.
Oh no. Which one am I even supposed to watch? I've been behind the last day or two.
Doesn't matter.
Yikes.
No. It's from something from tonight.
Oh, from tonight?
No, I'm not gonna
tell her.
I'm not gonna tell you.
Oh no. Okay. I'm so confused. Okay, well, I guess I'll have to figure out what we're talking about. Cartridge. Does this mean anything?
What?
Cartridge. I feel like, okay, more people are saying cartridge, but I don't know what this means. Huh. Okay, well, we will...
It's pronounced cartridge. Not cartridge.
Cartridge. Oh my god, I'm so confused.
Okay.
That's okay. I'll figure it out later. But I did go over all the evidence that I wanted to talk to you guys about today. But we still have the question that I posed at the beginning, which is, does the perfect crime actually exist? All I can think about is cartridge now. But
listen, I don't want to bring it up. You were teasing me. You were throwing shade my way.
Does this have to do with the bullet casing?
It's just how it's pronounced cartridge, not cartridge.
Oh,
that's it. That's all it is.
Okay. Well, sorry guys. I'm not the best at pronunciating.
It's all good. Listen, no. It's totally fine. I've mispronounced things all the time. I've mispronounced things online.
Wait, so I'm saying cartridge, but it's cartridge. It's cartridge.
Yes.
But I'm saying cartridge.
You said cartridge, but it's cartridge.
Cartridge.
Listen, I've mispronounced. Listen, I mispronounced Deus Volt the first time I said it. I was like Deuce Vault. So all good. I've
never pretended to be a pronunciation expert, guys.
There you go.
It's fine. It's fine.
You know what? I guess you're not adopted because if you're mispronouncing words like I do all the time, then we must be genetically related then. So I guess I can't say that you're adopted anymore. Because
I'm just gonna say Cartridge from now on.
No, don't say that. Don't say Cartridge. It's not a Cartridge. There you go. So guys, there's proof that we're related because I've mispronounced so many words in the last 8 months. Rose, the first time I mentioned Caroline's name, I mispronounced Caroline Levitt's name, and that was really embarrassing.
What did you say?
I can't remember. Caroline Levitt or something. I don't know.
That's a name. That's names are
but
more usable.
Mispronounced a lot of words, so it's all good, But there you go.
Okay.
You are putting me on the spot and throwing shade at me.
But you know, it's part of the gig, Goldie.
There you go.
Part of the gig. But okay, so as I practice my pronunciation of certain words, I do want to come back to the perfect crime idea and thinking about whether I think the perfect crime actually exists. And I think after looking at all of these different pieces of evidence, my answer is probably no. I don't think there is such a thing as a truly perfect crime. And obviously, we spoke about this. There are crimes that go unsolved all of the time. There are cold cases that have been sitting around for decades. There are people who commit crimes and who will commit crimes who have never been identified and might never be identified. And there are some cases that might never be solved, but I think there is an important difference between a crime being unsolved versus a crime actually being perfect. Because if we're going to call something a perfect crime, it would have to mean that someone managed to commit a crime without leaving any sort of evidence that could ever meaningfully connect them to what happened. So, after everything we've talked about tonight and all of the different pieces of evidence that could actually be left behind a crime scene, I'm sure you can appreciate how incredibly difficult that might actually be, just because there's so many different ways to potentially leave something behind. Whether or not investigators are actually able to properly identify that and come to the right conclusions is, a different story. Also, investigators don't necessarily need to find just one piece of evidence. It's all about putting everything together and being able to accurately get different pieces of the puzzle and seeing where the full picture of the evidence might be converging. And yeah, it's really about collecting as much reliable pieces of information as possible and then seeing whether those different pieces of information are telling a consistent story. And so that's why I ultimately land on no, the perfect crime probably doesn't exist, not because forensic science is perfect, but because, every crime is going to have something left behind. Whether or not investigators are able to figure it out is a different story, though. So that's my conclusion. But this doesn't mean you guys should try to get away with murder or anything like that. Again, this is not a tutorial. We're not condoning any sort of bad behavior.
If anything, Rose, you're pointing out why you should never engage in crimes, because there are so many ways that you can get caught. And so, just be a good person and don't do bad things.
Apparently you pronounced this guy's name wrong. So there.
I know. I say Erdogan. I know it's Erdogan. I know. I always say Erdogan or Erdogan. I know. See, I mispronounce things all the time.
I kind of like Erdogan. It sounds better.
But it is actually Erdogan. Oh yeah, and then remember the one time I was really angry and I was like, I don't even own fire guns. Remember that? There you go. I've done it. I don't only mispronounce words. I literally say the wrong words. So when I'm angry, I will just be like, I don't even own fire guns. There you go. So
I love it. I love that. Okay, shall we go to super chats now? Okay, so we went through the few at the beginning. Thank you so much. I'll go through them again quickly right now. So Jeff, thank you so much for this comment. And yes, again, not something I condone. Goldie gifted the 10 memberships, and then Atgi the 5. Thank you so much for that. And I hope you guys enjoyed the donuts for the mods. So let me know your favorite kind of donut. I personally love Boston cream. I love Boston cream donuts. Goldie, what's your favorite donut?
I like sour cream glazed. Ooh. I don't have them very often, but sour cream glazed would be my favorite. The Boston cream is a close second, but I'm a big fan of sour cream glazed.
Yeah, I love all of that. Okay, and then Spaghetti says, justice for Monstera. Justice for Monstera. Monstera? Now I'm like, I'm all insecure about my pronunciation. I have to like double check. Goldie, what does this mean? Spaghetti, what is Monstera? Monstera.
Oh, some sort of plant. Oh, I think it's because it's in your, if you go to your crime scene, the plant in your crime scene is called a Monstera. So pull up your crime scene.
Monstera. Don't say it wrong.
Monstera.
This guy?
I think so, or maybe the plant that's spilled there at the bottom.
Maybe. Oh, maybe. But there's no leaf. There's no leaf there. Can't be this guy. That's a little succulent. Goldie, if you zoom in really closely, that's a picture of you.
Really? Oh my gosh, guys, I'm famous. I think it's probably referring to the pot on the ground.
Funny spaghetti. I like that. Thank you. Steven says, seems the older you get, the less printable and readable the prints are. Yeah, and this actually has to do with just like skin texture changing as you get older, and like your collagen and skin elasticity also kind of changing for that. So they can be less readable, but the prints certainly still are there. Next, you start this comment from Tony, who says, we caught a thief with a kind of powder that turned his hands purple when she washed it, like a super dye. You can't wash off. She stole a lot of money. Oh my gosh. I would love to hear the full story version of this, but that's almost like a good way to kind of bait someone to kind of catch the criminal. Kind of reminds me of the time we had an office lunch thief, and someone like laced some brownies with a specific something, and then that's how we were able to figure out who the perpetrator was, because they became all loopy one day after eating food that was not theirs.
So I looked at, oh my gosh, that's hilarious, Rose. Oh my gosh. I looked it up, but so it's called anti-theft detection powder, and it often looks like an innocuous, nearly invisible or dark greenish brownish dust when dry. Reaction: when it touches skin, oils, sweat, or water, it instantly activates and creates a vivid, hard to wash purple stain. This actually reminds me of someone who was purple from head to toe one day.
Yeah, guys, we have this engineering tradition.
Engineering, guys, engineering tradition, okay? Yeah, you know what? Now I know. See, Tony now is telling the truth. So now I know why you were purple from head to toe that day, and now you're claiming it was some sort of engineering tradition. Okay.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. So it's actually a Canadian tradition, and it's called purpling, and it's something that we do during our orientation, or like Frosh Week, which is the beginning of when you start school as an engineer. And maybe one day I'll go into all of our different engineering traditions, but it's apparently there's an event called purpling, where we jump into a bathtub that completely dyes our skin using a substance. The substance we used at the time was called crystal violet, which actually got discontinued a few years ago because it was deemed to be a carcinogen.
Oh my God.
But it was a kind of medical dye. And yeah, basically like you jump in this tub, it dyes your skin, your hair, your nails, you're completely purple. Like you look like a Smurf for at least a week, if not more. But historically, the reason why this happens is because it's rooted in different Canadian military engineering traditions. And, it's just related to engineers in Canada. And it's a tradition that all engineering schools do now. And, I was one of these purple people at one point. Maybe one day I'll show a photo of what that looks like. Maybe not. But yeah, you're stained. Like it stains you. It doesn't wash off immediately. maybe now, since crystal violet is not used anymore, it doesn't last as long with some of these, newer, more safe chemicals. But at the time, you had a bunch of people walking around these university campuses all over Canada, purple.
And only the engineers did this, guys. Like, I never did this. This is an engineering thing.
This is an engineering thing. Yeah, it was an engineering thing. And yeah, like there's a lot of fun, cool engineering Canadian traditions. And like, I'll talk about my ring too one day, but this is the iron ring that all engineers in Canada have the option to receive. And there's a whole story behind the iron ring too. There's like a really cool oath that we have to say in advance of receiving the ring, which really keeps us, in check as engineers. And I'll go into that story maybe another time, but maybe I'll make it like a members only video talking about the story behind the iron ring and the engineering wing. But yeah. Thank you for the purple comment. Or, maybe we're all criminals trying to escape.
Don't include me in your, we're all whatever.
Charles sent some jewels. Laura sent some jewels. Thank you guys so much for that. And then Quill says roughly 100 people globally have no fingerprints. Of those people, they have a rare genetic disorder called adermatoglyphobia. Adermatoglyphia.
Adermatoglyphia. That's how I would pronounce it. I don't know if I'm correct, but I would say it's pronounced adermatoglyphia.
Adermatoglyphia. Adermatoglyphia. That's how you say it.
Right.
Yeah, you were right.
Honestly, it's only because it's because of my legal background and a lot of like learning words in different languages, and there's a lot of Latin as well and like Greek and stuff. So I just kind of
That's really cool. Yeah. So this is I'm looking at it now. It's a rare genetic condition, which means a person is born without fingerprints. Yeah, so I guess, can aid in crime if you really wanted. But, again, not condoning any sort of crime. But it could certainly be harder to find a fingerprint. But again, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not leaving behind other kinds of DNA as well. So you could be leaving behind dead skin cells or other trace biological material, which can be potentially used in an investigation. Thank you so much, Quills, for that comment. Next up, we have Raider with just a super comment. Thank you so much, Raider. Really appreciate that and for you being here. And then Adamo, who says, love you both, the dynamic duo. I went to the Red Cross to donate blood. They threw me out and said, we don't want your type here. Oh, no.
It's a blood type joke.
Yeah, that's so funny. It's really good to donate blood, just in general. But really funny joke. Thank you so much, Adamo. Goldie, have you donated blood before? You're not really good with needles.
No, I'm not. I have a phobia of needles, but I have donated blood. I've been to blood drives and I've donated blood. Yeah.
That's great, especially, considering you have a phobia. I used to donate a while ago, but then I had to stop just because they actually didn't want my blood because they're like, you don't have enough iron, and so like we don't want your blood. So that's why I was like thinking, Adamo, maybe like you also have like an iron deficiency like I do.
No, it's just a dad joke. It's like we don't want your type here, so it's like dad joke type of thing.
I like it. Thank you. And look, we have a name, Goldie, dynamic duo. Love that. Next we have push-ups. What is it that draws women to true crime stuff? Forensic science is over 70% female, the inverse of most STEM male-female ratios. I don't know. I guess like we all have some sort of morbid curiosity about just like true crime. But honestly, most women I know, I think there's just one girl I know who just doesn't like any sort of gore or even just like horror movies in general. And so she's not into it. But most other women that I know, like even mom, she loves like this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
there's something about women that just draws them to like this kind of mystery. Yeah, why do you think women are drawn to it, Goldie?
Because we're the creators of life, and so we take it away. I don't know.
Oh my God. Okay, so I just looked this up quickly, and the first thing I get is women are largely drawn to true crime as a psychological survival tool and coping mechanism.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Studies and analyses suggest that engaging with stories of violence helps women process fear, spot behavioral red flags, and reclaim a sense of control in a world where they face disproportionate statistical risks of victimization.
You know, I actually agree with that because I like watching the true crime stuff and like the police interrogations and stuff because I'm like, okay, so these are like the behavioral signs that I need to like watch out for and spot. So that part totally makes sense because I will watch these things and I'm like, all right, so that's like, that's a red flag, right? So okay. Wow, good to know.
Yeah, I think like that's one reason I like to watch. Like I do like to spot the potential flags. Another reason why I like to watch police interrogations is like I don't think I'm ever going to be in that situation. But I'm just thinking, if one day I was in a police interrogation, I would like to know the strategies and techniques that the investigator is using, just as an FYI.
Okay, let me just give you the only piece of advice you ever need to know. If you're ever in a police investigation or interrogation room, you immediately say, I want a lawyer, and that's it. And you don't answer any questions. Like, that's it. That's it.
One thing about Canada, though, is that like in the US, you can be in an interrogation with an investigator with your lawyer present. But in Canada, you can't have that. So like you would have to consult separately with your lawyer. And then in the interrogation room, your lawyer doesn't necessarily have to be there. So like you would still be one-on-one with the investigator. Is that true?
Oh my gosh,
I think in Canada, like you don't have that right specifically to have your lawyer in the interrogation room with you. So you would have your conversation separately with the lawyer and they would tell you like, say this, don't say this, et cetera, et cetera. And then, but they're not in the room with you to like say, she's not answering that, or you don't have to answer that, or like how they do it in the US.
Yeah, no, it's not. They don't have that right in Canada. But here's the thing though, you have the right to remain silent, right? So that's the strategy for criminal law, which is like, okay, so once police give you like a reasonable opportunity to speak, after that, like you have the right to remain silent. So the police can detain you, but if you don't speak, then that's it.
Mm-hmm. So, and then I know sometimes they try to get things out of you by saying like, oh, like it's going to look really bad to the jurors if you don't say anything. So I think they like try to pull things out of you that way.
Yeah. But that's the only strategy you need, bro. So not for you. Anyone who's watching, again, I'm not a practicing lawyer, so this isn't legal advice, but this is, legal information that I learned when I went to law school. So the legal information that I learned is if you're ever in a police interrogation, you just keep your mouth shut. Like that's it. That's it. You say nothing. You say nothing. That's the best advice, right? Because you can never outsmart or out trick like the police when they're questioning you, because like they're good, they're very good, and and I have a lot of respect for police officers, right? So a lot of respect for them, but they are very, very good at their jobs. And you could say the most mundane thing, and you have no idea how that will impact you. But I mean, you know what, the best advice I can actually give, Rose, is don't ever do something that would put you in that situation.
Of course. No.
How about that, right?
Of course.
So,
Obviously, but I'm just
situation that would put you in a situation where
no, but I'm even thinking like if I was framed for something, right? Like if someone frames me, or like, there's trace evidence that secondarily moved into like my body of like someone who was deleted, and like investigators are like, oh, the evidence points to euros, but I didn't do it. I still need to know how to protect myself.
Okay.
Hypothetically, of course, hypothetically. But yes, okay, rule number 1, just keep it shut, guys. Keep it shut. Okay, so next up we have Aggie, who asks or says, DNA testing possibly identified Jack the Ripper as a Polish hairdresser in his 20s, using evidence all the way back from the 1880s. Wow, that's really cool. I want to look more into that and see what kind of evidence they kept. I would think they wouldn't have contained or preserved the evidence from the 1880s, but I could be wrong in a way for it to actually be accessible and testable now. But I guess some of these cold cases go really, really far back. Thank you for sharing that, Aggie. That's really cool. Soapbox. So this is a comment that you started for me, Goldie. This show is wonderful because unlike when we were in real school, we get to learn and crack jokes and chew gum in the back of the class the whole way through. Yes, guys, chew your gum. I don't care. Just as long as you participate and be nice to each other, then we're all good here. We are all good. I'm glad you're having fun. Thank you, Soapbox. Red shared some jewels. Thank you for that. Aggie with another comment. London's one of the most monitored cities in the world. Someone living there doing everyday stuff could get captured by 70 cameras a day. Wow, that really gives me like Big Brother 1984 vibes. Where was George Orwell from? Oh, he was English. So yeah, that checks out with George Orwell. And Goldie, I know like a while back you said you want to like reread 1984. Maybe we should do like a book club.
Okay.
Read books and like analyze them. And I know I can't remember. I think someone in one of your streams mentioned like audio book or something like that. And then I think you said something about like copyright issues. But what we could do is, with my terrible pronunciation, I could read the book and then you can commentate on it. So we can do that. And then I think we'll be fine that way. We can do like chapter by chapter.
We could. You know what? There's actually also the full version of George Orwell's 19.
It was Minor. It was Minor who said that. Like someone could read it.
Yeah. So guys, actually, speaking of 1984, I actually found, let me pull this up for you guys. I'll just share the screen really quick. So you can actually find the full version of George Orwell's 1984 movie. It was made in 1956. And the full movie is available on YouTube. And I actually watched it. And it's pretty good. I mean, obviously it doesn't get into all of the details and nuances, but I would say for anyone who is not familiar with 1984, like you can go watch it on YouTube right now. It's publicly available. So I just don't know if I have the legal rights to share it or anything, but just search up, 1984 full movie and you'll find it there. So you guys can go watch it on your own as well. Just a little.
Love that. Thanks for sharing.
But yeah, I mean, we could do some sort of book club or something, or maybe we could just get AI to read it for us and then we can just follow along. Who knows?
Maybe we can. What, you don't want to make fun of my terrible pronunciation?
No, I only make fun of your pronunciation when you accuse me of being in the crime scene.
Fair. Okay, next up, Steven says, the perfect crime is one that nobody knows about or realizes that something was done. That is, I guess, the perfect crime. No one knows that anything even happened. So if no one knows, then sure. And then last but not least, Tony says, power engineering for a topic, Rose. I did my time. Okay, you want to talk about power? I will add it to the list. Power engineering. Guys, we have a long growing list. And I know some people who have been asking for a specific topic, Spaghetti, I'm looking at you, are like, Rose, why haven't you done this topic? And guys, like the list is long. I will get to them. It's just, it's we're here for the long run. This is not like a short time thing, We are here for good. I don't know about you guys, but I'm having a great time learning about these things, and then, coming to talk to you guys about them. We're gonna get through all the topics. Trust me. And then, another one just came through. Miner says, good night and rest well, ladies. Thank you so much, Miner. Appreciate that. And yeah, thank you guys all for joining us tonight. Goldie, thank you. I hope you learned something, and I hope you had fun. I hope I didn't scare you too much tonight. I don't know. What do you think? It wasn't too scary, right?
No, I thought this was really interesting, and it was really fun. I certainly enjoyed the topic, and I really appreciate how you kind of take these, complicated sciencey facts, and you break it down in a way that makes it just makes it very easy for us commoners, let's say, to understand and absorb. So no, I always appreciate coming here every Sunday evening and learning about a new science topic. It's just a nice way to sort of end the week and kind of reset myself and get myself ready for the week to come. So always appreciate everything that you're doing, and I love your companion packs as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Goldie. And thank you always for joining us and coming on and bringing, your crew on our little field trip. Really appreciate that.
Listen, at this point, it's mandatory for me now. Like so, Rose, I don't know if you know this, but I noticed this on my live stream last night, but I didn't want to say anything because I was, busy speaking. But I think apparently you made a comment about how like your live stream is tonight, but I think you put in the wrong date, so people were confused, and some were like, oh no, is it happening Saturday night? And then people were like, oh no, what are we gonna do? Like, we have to go to Rose's channel. Goldie needs to end her live stream so we can go to Rose. And then
yikes.
No, but it was just really funny. So it's not just my crew, Rose. Like, you have such a loyal following and a loyal base as well. So thanks to everyone who comes here on Rose's channel over from the Goldie Show for our optional class field trip. And yeah, it's just really great, and I know we all appreciate it, and I certainly really enjoy learning about new science topics every week, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do in the future with your channel. And I know you're working on some videos and stuff as well, so very excited about all of that. And yeah, at this point, I mean, Sunday night, it's kind of like our hangout time, and it's an opportunity for us to chill and also learn about some cool science. So anyways, before you land your plane, I just want to say to everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Just remember, if you are watching from my channel, if you want to participate in the live stream, make sure that you go to Rose's channel, the GammaRay Report. And no, she's not adopted. She is my real sister. I just like to tease her. But yeah, Rose, thank you so much for having me. And guys, everyone, have a great night. Love you too, Rose. And I'll see all of you guys tomorrow. All right. Thanks, Rose.
Awesome. Thanks, Goldie. And thank you so much for joining. But guys, thank you also all for joining. And if there's, one thing that you want to take away from this stream, it's just how much information that we can leave behind without ever realizing it. Whether it's a fingerprint on a glass or a tiny fiber or a piece of clothing or any of those skin cells that you might leave behind. The chemistry inside our bodies all leave clues. Even the data created by our phones and the digital landscape around us all paint this sort of bigger picture. Thank you guys all so much for hanging out with me and Goldie tonight. Thank you for all of your questions and super chats. And as always, I hope that you learned something fun. I hope you had fun. And I hope that you have a great rest of your night. So let's hop back onto our Q400 Magic School plane and head back home. And remember, guys, that science is wild.